Welcome to the show, everybody. If you can tell, oh man, I've had this cold, flu. What would you call it? I got sick a couple of days ago, and this would be why there hasn't been a lot of videos in the past couple of days. Got sick over the weekend, had to call in sick for work, and then it just turned into no videos over the past couple of days. But hey, we've got a good show lined up. I'm going to try to keep the coughs off camera. I'm going to try to keep blowing my nose off camera. We'll do it all. But we're going to be talking about this leadership debate. This is going to be the only televised one. The last one we did a live stream of it. It was pre-recorded, and that was good. It was a good turnout for that. So we're going to get into this one. This one's being broadcast by Global News, BC, Decision BC, BC election. And of course, we're going to have some people coming in to add conjecture to it. Not just me. Let's have some other people in here to talk about what it is that we're going to be seeing on the TV screen tonight. So tonight, first guests in tonight are, of course, Anita Kay, and we also have Alex Zoltan. Welcome to the chat, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Clyde.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Everybody that's probably watching knows Alex Zoltan. He's been featured on the channel quite a bit, breaking some stories nationally recently. We were just talking about going live before. Anita Kay also working with the mainstream media for decades before discovering just how dubious they are in their coverage. And why don't you explain a bit about yourself, Anita?
Well, we're about to watch a debate going on in about 20 minutes. And that debate, like things like that, I worked in that building for 20 years of my life where they're going to do that. And I used to work on all those debates. And I can tell you exactly where they are and what they're doing and how they do it technically, but that would be really boring. I think what is interesting is the change that we're seeing, the drastic change in the media. And for me, I personally know and have worked with all the people you're going to see tonight. So you're going to hear from Richard Zussman and Keith Baldry, and Chris and Sophie are going to host it. I know the producer. I would have been one of those people working on this broadcast, but my opinions about a certain subject were not well tolerated there. And so they did everything they could to quickly remove me from that building as fast as possible. And that's what they did. But that was my background working there. And I'm very disappointed to see how the media has changed so drastically and how it's caused such a division in society, which I'm sure we'll hear a lot of tonight.
Yes, we will hear a lot of this tonight. I've noticed that it seems like a big desperation moving into this debate right now, a little bit on both sides. I mean, the Conservatives have come a long, long way, but it looks like polling is starting to contract just a little bit. I'll share the screen here so you can see. But this was just like September 30th, so not too long ago, about 10 days or so ago. And it's actually shifted. We're now looking at the odds of the NDP winning the most seats is 47% to 42%. And this is not just from Polling Canada on Twitter, but this is from actual 338.com. Even though it looks like 50-50 popular projection, I'm not sure what we're seeing here, where these polls are coming from, or who's answering these polls, right? There's also the possibility that people who don't favor the media and don't favor the left, the far left, are also not responding to polls. So that's a possibility as well, right?
Yeah, and I would say, like with any type of poll, they never tell you how many people did you talk to, 50 or 500. Sometimes you can find out, like you'll see it in the projection. So that makes a big difference. Like if you've polled 50 people and these are the numbers, that's really not an average of how people are feeling and thinking. And I think over 10 days ago, I think it might be 2 weeks ago now, the NDP were polling at below 40%, but now that seems to gone up a little bit. So they do appear neck and neck, where the Greens aren't even moving the dial. It looks like there. What do you think, Alex, of that?
Well, if I'm reading this correctly, am I correct in assuming that the Greens hold the balance of power? In this case, I mean, if it's a similar parliamentary first past the post system, could we end up with an NDP Green minority government?
It's anything's possible with our little pass the post system, I suppose. I don't know enough about how that's all gonna break down. There's a great video on YouTube if we have it. It's a short little video called Pass the Post, and it kind of explains like how that all works, so that even if a small number of people vote, or sorry, even if like the majority gets it, even if the electorate is
popular
small.
vote.
Yeah, the popular vote, like however you explain that. Yeah. So that even though it looks like these people aren't moving the dial, sometimes they can sneak up and surprise you with the way pass the post works, right? Which I'm not as good as explaining at, but yeah.
Well,
Well, you can see it here. You got 45% with a lead of 48 to 44 in the actual seat projections here.
Yeah.
Compared to the popular vote.
Yeah. I mean, and what do we think about how the votes are going to be? Like, one thing we could tell people is vote early. Like, you don't have to wait till the 19th. You can vote early. That way you can, it's done and dusted. And to be honest, I don't even know how votes are actually totally counted. Is it electronic? Is it hand counted? These are all good questions I could Google as we go on in the evening. Like, and I want to make sure there's no vote tampering and vote fraud. Like, does our vote matter? We've heard these weird things go on in the US with the mules and they can make dead people vote. Like you died, but it's like, oh, John Smith cast his ballot because there's so much voter fraud. What do you guys think of that? Do you think we have fair elections here in BC and that our actual vote actually counts?
Well, I'd hope so. And like we've seen a lot of what's happening in the United States, and people are concerned, obviously. New York, or not New York, California has just passed a law. Elon Musk was talking about this recently, where they're making it illegal to even ask for ID in any votes, like federal, municipal, statewide. That's crazy. As far as I'm aware, you register, you show up, you have to go to your polling station, you have to vote where you're registered to, and that's it. You don't really have a choice, and they check your ID when you go in. So in that stance, I'd have faith in that. I don't know whether or not people are voting after they've been deceased. It is a leftist thing to ask people to vote and vote often. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know any of the fraud because I'm concerned too much with just doing my legal ballot and casting it legally.
Yeah. I have heard that they get people that I forget what it's called, but there is some voter fraud going on in the States. And you would hope that when you go and tick the box and tick your ballot, that gets counted properly and that our votes matter and mean something. But I really hope that that's the case. I've never seen. So you know what? A good story would be to go to Elections Canada as they take the boxes and follow the boxes. Okay, how do you count this? And then how does it all get tabulated? When I worked at Global, we'd have like this Bannister Lake, we'd have this little tickery kind of thing where all the numbers would come in, and we'd have a font guy looking at the numbers, and we'd put the numbers up as they come up, and then we'd update the graphics and all that. I don't know the back mechanism as to how that gets on the air, right? There's a point between the ticking the box, counting the ballot, and getting to us, so we put it on the air. So we should follow that and make sure nothing's being tampered with.
I think you can volunteer.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
It'd be kind of interesting. I don't know if they'd
let you tag along.
Yeah, or let you record the volunteering or anything, but
yeah,
it would be interesting to know how the inner workings operate for sure.
Yeah, we want to know that it matters because it means something to us, especially because we've had 7 years of the NDP. David Eby's been in power, I think, since 2022. Yeah, November 2022. And it's so funny how he has. It's like David Eby. Look at the economy. Look at the drugs. Look at the the state of British Columbia and business, and you're going to stand up here and say, "Oh, I promise you this, and I promise you that," and well, what are you doing? You're already in power. It kind of reminds me of Kamala Harris. You're already right.
I said the same thing during the last debate. It's absolutely correct. It's analogous because they're running against their own record. They're saying, we know how terrible everything is, but wouldn't it be great if somebody was in charge that wasn't incompetent? It's like, you're in charge.
You're in charge. You're the person in charge. Hey, VP, Miss Kamala Harris, you're already in there. If you're not making these decisions now, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing now? And it's so funny. You see these celebrities like Bruce Springsteen and bloody Ben Stiller, Julia Louis-Dreyfus. They're all like, vote for Kamala, vote for Kamala. Well, she's already in. She's already in. And just like David Eby, I promise you this. I'm going to give you this. We're going to do this for the teaching assistants of kids in school and blah, all the things he's promising. You're already in there. What have you done? If I go to a job and I don't perform on my job for 2 years, what do you think happens to me? I get fired or demoted.
And just like Kamala, David Eby wasn't elected. He was
That's true.
He was just the guy to fall into that place until the next election came through.
He ran against this woman, Anjali, what's her name? Appadurai? Anjali Appadurai, and that was his only challenger, and she was disqualified. But I actually don't know. I have to refresh my memory on what she did to get disqualified. So she was disqualified, and so by default, he got in there. David Eby, we didn't even elect this tall drink of water.
He failed upwards.
Failing up. I wish I could fail up. Yeah.
Holy cow. I got one more guest that's coming in for conjecture on this debate. I've got Wyatt Claypool joining the show.
Wyatt Claypool.
Oh, nice.
Smartest man in BC. Hello, Wyatt.
Our own October surprise.
If I'm the smartest man in BC, that's scary. Yeah, because I'm late getting on to here because, BC traffic is so incredible and whatnot. I got to slowly poke my way down the Fraser Highway.
Oh, well, that's okay. You're here now. And we're happy to have you. Hey, you know what? This is a panel, Clyde. This is a panel.
Yeah, we've got a panel.
I mean, no, but this is the best panel. This is way better than Zussman, way better than Baldry, because we are honest people with honest opinions. And I'm the one that was inside, and now I'm out, and I can give you whatever gossip.
Yeah, give us all the dirt.
Yeah, I'll give you the dirt.
Who's the biggest jerk?
Oh yeah, good job.
It's David Aiken, isn't it?
David Aiken. He was out east though, but I would just talk to him in my ear, so I didn't really personally connect with him too much. But so after the debate tonight, they're going to have their panels, and they're going to have other panels too, not just Zussman and Baldry. So we'll see who they pick. Okay, we'll see who they pick and the things that they have to say in the after show. Right, Wyatt?
I will say it's at least better than having Andrew Coyne and Chantal Hubert just banty around the exact same. They all have the exact same talking point, and they all just rephrase it slightly differently. Pure Polyev bad type stuff, whatever. Oh man, isn't he such a bore? Oh yes, we're far too fancy for any of this conservatism.
Yeah, that's the show, the CBC show with Rosemary Barton.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Power and Politics.
Power and Politics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why my friend Daniel Boardman, when he used to watch the CBC every day and do a show called The Worst of the CBC, he would always rate each of the national shows, the national every day when he rated it. He'd always rate it on the Rosemary Barton scale of awfulness. How many Rosemary Bartons do you get out of 10?
No, but may I just say that if you're producing that show, you are so lazy as a producer to book the same guests night after night, and what's the French woman's name again?
Chantal Hubert.
Chantal Hubert or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Why do I need to hear from her night after night after night? Find another guest. There's a lot
crazy Chantal Hubert story, if I may.
Yeah. Okay.
I was in Montreal for a little bit.
FLQ or riot if they didn't have her on, right?
Well, I was in Montreal for a bit, and I was in the Sherbrooke area, so I was near McGill, and she walks down the street all the time, just like a total celebrity. But nobody, she's so ubiquitous and around all the time that people barely notice her. And I just found that really amusing because I was like, man, if she were in Alberta, she wouldn't be able to walk down the street at all.
No one would recognize her. Well, maybe they would. I don't know.
Yeah, but they'd be screaming at her. And
the worst show I think is I think it's I'm not sure if it's Power and Politics. It's the one that has Fred Delory on it, and then the other two guys. I don't know how to pronounce the Liberals guy's name. It's the bald guy who does that, who hosts that show.
The bald guy. What's it? I just did something on him. I forgot his name. Dave. He's a very ordinary name. David something.
He's not bad, but the panel have.
He's David Cochran.
Yeah,
I think.
When I say he's not bad, I mean like he doesn't tend to be a obnoxious force the way Rosemary Barton is. At least I find he tends to just throw the discussion around to the guests. But the problem on that show is the guests are the worst. It's consultants and strategy firm employees who literally cannot say anything because they will lose their jobs if they say anything interesting. So Fred Delory, the NDP lady, the Liberal guy, Greg McEachern, they literally can't say a thing because either they still work for a party or they work for a strategy firm that is employed by a party or by friends of a party. So they all have the most nothing opinions about anything.
Right.
They do, yeah. Except for this one time they were discussing the Pierre Poilievre CTV edit, and they had somebody from Summa Strategies on who actually laid it out and told the truth that it was journalistic malpractice to cut up his clip. She was good.
Good thing somebody was actually sick that day that allowed a spot to be open.
I thought it was just absurd that their apology though. It was I guess somebody was wasn't paying attention. No, it took careful effort to cut that clip up. I mean, if you're a video editor, you know how much time that would take. It would actually consume a bunch of time. It wasn't just haphazardly put together and then showcase that way. They did it to change the narrative completely. It's
there
unethical.
was no mistake. I did a video on that. There's no mistake of how videos come into the newsroom, how the newscast is produced, how the editor cuts the clip. There is no way you could make a mistake and splice that clip together by accident or take it out of context because there's no way.
That brings up a question I have for you, actually. From your experience in the newsroom, do you find that there is, broadly speaking, an ideological possession? Or do you think that it's more or less a directive from the top down and people are kind of begrudgingly pushing these narratives?
The COVID narrative, they weren't begrudgingly pushing that. They believed it. The psychosis took them, and they could see nothing else. So no, they weren't. And if you did secretly feel a different way, you might talk about it in a hushed room with me, or you would express it, but you dare not express it openly. It was almost like an unwritten rule. You know how you're not supposed to say something like mean about someone, like, oh, your sister's chubby or something. That you're not supposed to say mean things, like, there's things you don't
talk
say.
about religion,
talk about religion or abortion or whatever,
right.
Those dinner politics or whatever, and everybody knew to keep their mouth shut no matter how they felt about.
That sounds very creepy
experiment.
and Orwellian.
I always think a great example of just how insidious media bias can be, because you're right, Anita. It's not that these people wake up every day and like, we're going to be biased, we're going to lie. Who could wake up every day knowing that you're like, I suck? The thing is, a great example, though, is the Nick Sandmann story from CNN, where they went after the Covington Catholic kids and Nick Sandmann all wearing the MAGA hats. And then he was smiling in that Native man's face who's like banging a drum. And if you know the full context, it was Black Hebrew Israelites and then this activist guy who actually started this, not even really a confrontation, just this moment where they're kind of like getting up in these kids' faces and they're just smiling and acting normal.
Thing is they were young kids, though. They were waiting for a bus after a
they're high school kids after a pro-life rally or whatever, like just a friendly march in Washington, D.C. The thing is with that clip, if you know the context, which is not hard to have gotten the greater context, you could have never come to the conclusion that Nick Sandmann was in the wrong. But the thing is, as weird as it is to think, or as difficult it is to, as hard as it is to think this, the people in CNN and other legacy media organizations who went after Nick Sandmann, I guarantee you, they actually thought he was a villain. They both knew he probably didn't do anything wrong, but there's too many things that confirm their bias that they were willing to shut those things out. Because even CNN, they would have had their lawyer run down to the newsroom and say, are you guys stupid? And they would be like, well, what did we do wrong? He's like, white kid wearing a MAGA hat smirking at a Native man's face. It makes sense. It's like, guys, you have to consider greater facts than just that. But
Yeah,
they
yeah.
Across the
truly
board,
probably
though.
thought they were
So
right. That's the
even
thing.
YouTube creators. I know Philip DeFranco. He's an American news guy. He's been doing it for decades, and he jumped in to give his 2 cents on that particular story, and he didn't back down. His apology afterwards was a non-apology. It was just I'm sorry, I hurt the guy's feelings. Moving on, and
That's the thing.
it was crazy.
They know, and even at that point, I guarantee you, he still feels like he was somewhat in the right. Where that's the problem with propaganda and bias, is that you can both know you're wrong, but can't believe that you could be wrong, kind of a thing. It's like you completely got the facts backwards, but how could I be wrong? I'm me. I would never be wrong.
Yeah. Like the narrative comes from the top, like it comes from management, it comes from the network. We have a network rundown. Whatever the narrative is, it comes down and you believe it. So by the time you're writing the little story and putting it on the air, you've been told that so many times that you believe it. So you believe this little kid is a punk. So it takes nothing to go look at the other side of the story, which is the job of a journalist, the job of a reporter. That's why we have the news. What do we have you for if you're not looking at that other side to say, hey, this is the other side of that story? But you're right. They've been told one thing and that's what they go with. So you can't conceive of anything else. Yeah.
I got caught up in my own little video editing controversy this week.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, you got mentioned in Parliament, didn't you?
Yeah. No, I didn't get mentioned in Parliament. I know Crier Media did that article.
I know.
Oh, okay.
They called me a maple mega psycho.
Oh, you were the guy. Oh,
I'm the guy. I'm the
I
guy.
heard that term, maples. I heard that somewhere.
Yeah.
Maple mega psycho. Oh, congratulations.
Oh, they called me a far right influencer.
Maple MAGA. I love it.
Yeah. It's just crazy because it was all about the church burnings in response to the residential school findings in Kamloops. And I was just on Clyde's show challenging, Mr. McMurtry. So it was funny to be called a far right denialist and all that crazy stuff.
I saw Steve Boots talking about you or whatever, like manipulating footage. And yes, that particular church that just burned down, that everyone knows in their heads and can picture the footage. Yes, that might have been a construction site accident, but there's almost misinformation about misinformation. They will take something where somebody is slightly wrong because they made a wrong assumption, but they would have been right 99 out of 100 other times something happened. And then they'll be like, ergo, churches have not been being burned down by arsonists, even though we have like footage of people walking up with jerry cans to the doors of synagogues and churches and like dumping it. And we're like, but they were wrong once. That means this never happens.
Well, I revised the video to use B-roll footage of churches burning that were more contextually relevant. So hopefully that satisfies them.
So we're about 1 minute away, right?
So I'm going to do a quick plug because we mentioned Maple MAGA, and that's very similar to one of the coffees that we have on the store. So I'd love everybody to check out the store. Link is in the description down below. That would be the medium roast. That's the MAGA medium. We are making Americanos great again here in Canada. A lot of people bringing up the dark MAGA because I've got, Elon Musk made that very popular recently. We also have, and that would be the dark humor morning coping mechanism. Go get yourself some of that if you're more of a dark drinker. And if you're like myself and you like to still enjoy a coffee in the evening, get yourself an ecological decaf. Well, there's no sense of being environmental. Let's be ecological here. Let's do things right. The Swiss water the natural Swiss water decaffeination method. This is all it's all roasted locally in Vancouver. I'm gonna be going down to be a part of that roasting this Saturday. So I'm gonna go make sure I'll get some footage of that so everybody can see that. But yes,
nice.
We're gonna be getting into that. Get yourself a cup of Joe. I enjoy this every single day.
Roasted in Burnaby, it said.
That's right. That's right.
I've been roasted in Burnaby. That's where the global studios are, Burnaby.
I'm broke, so I'm just drinking no-name coffee these days right now.
No.
I'm not sure if you guys ever watched that JJ McCullough video where he's talking about different Canadian objects, and he talks about like the no-name brand stuff, and he talks about it's a certain signifier of a lower middle-class income bracket. Every single time I'm going to my cupboard and I open it up and take out the thing, I'm like, lower middle class income bracket. Damn it, JJ.
Yeah, he was right. But some other stuff is good. I do have a prediction that David Eby is going to go hard on the Chris Sankey stuff. He's going to attack Rustad really badly.
I'm just seeing a lot of.
Well, we'll see this happen.
We'll see if
was
that happens.
the AIDS stuff.
Well, did you see
Better
the
healthcare.
did you see the bingo card they released on the BC NDP's on Twitter? They're kind of doing it as a joke. They think it's like a joke on John Rustad. Really, all it does is just completely reveals everything that David Eby is going to bring up in the debate. Like, if you're the conservative debate prep team, you would have taken that graphic and said, okay, here's every single line that David Eby is going to try and deploy during the debate. And you would be able to like just dunk on him because you know he's going to bring up the Chris Sankey thing. That was literally one of the squares on the bingo card, even though that's not actually how debate bingo works. It's usually like lines each person would use. You don't just put what your attacks are. Anyways.
Lorraine, thanks for the $10 super chat. Really appreciate that. And put a comment in the comment section as well. Here we go.
My name is Shachi Curl. I'm the president of the Angus Reid Institute, and tonight I am your debate moderator. With me, the leaders, John Rustad of the BC Conservative Party, David Eby of the BC NDP, and Sonia Furstenau of the BC Greens. We're coming to you tonight from the unceded traditional territories of the
God. Here we go. Here we right away.
Leaders, welcome. Hi. Several
Thank you
weeks
for the
ago,
virtue
you
signaling.
were presented with and agreed to tonight's format and the rules for this debate.
The
Neither
unceded
the
territory
topics
of the
nor the
comment
questions
section.
have been shared with you or your teams in advance. Tonight, you will be facing individual questions. You'll also have the opportunity to engage with one another during periods of open debate. And just before we begin, a few words from me to you. Please remember your audience this evening. It is the people of British Columbia, many of whom are engaging for the first time tonight by watching and listening to you. Let's give them a vigorous but respectful debate, one that everyone can hear and understand. The questions have been designed to challenge you and bring out the best responses you have. So please answer them. Okay, ready to debate?
Maybe you should say this before the broadcast.
So
lady.
our first topic tonight is leadership, and our first question goes to Mr. Eby. Mr. Eby, when your predecessor, John Horgan, stepped down, he left you with a $6 billion budget surplus. Your premiership has been marked by more spending, yet people are still struggling to see improvements in public safety, housing, and affordability. How much longer do British Columbians have to wait before they start to see things improve under your government?
Thanks for the question, Shachi, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'd also like to say a special thank you to the Vancouver Canucks for starting their season tomorrow instead of tonight, so that you can join us for this important discussion about where our province is going and how we can provide support for you and for your families. Families are under a lot of pressure right now. Huge strain from rising interest rates, global inflation driving up the cost of pretty much everything. I mean, the cost of food is a topic in the American presidential
Whose fault
debate.
is that?
And that's having an impact on the provincial
There's a
budget
strong
too.
pressure
We
around the
see
neck
that impact
when I put it
on the ability of government to spend. And so the question that you're going to hear answers
Listen
to
to him
tonight
deflect.
is
not
now
my
the
fault.
time that people need support more than ever? That's what I think. Or is now the time to cut back, to reduce services? And I believe that people need support now through things like our middle income tax cut,
Some more
through
freebies.
affordable childcare and car insurance.
They always say
We
that
started this work,
childcare.
Shachi, as you
10
said, under
years they've
John
been saying
Horgan,
that.
and we haven't stopped. And we can't stop because people need more support than ever to deal with the challenges they're facing today.
That's not the
Thank
problem,
you, Mr.
David.
Eby. Next question to you, Mr. Rustad. More than half of British Columbians say that
It's
you are
such a
too extreme in
2015
your
thing to
views
say
to
we
be
need to
premier.
invest in our
You've expressed
social safety
discomfort
nets and
with sex
services. Like,
education
everyone knows
curriculum.
it's not helpful.
You've said you
That- yeah,
regret
that's not
taking
what
the
people
COVID
want.
vaccine. You suggested on a podcast
here they
that
go with the
carbon
vaccine
emissions
question.
aren't a problem for
here we
carbon-based
go.
beings.
Yeah.
How can you convince everyone in this province that you have the judgment and the temperament to
Ugh.
be premier for all British Columbians?
Well, thank you very much for the question.
For the terrible
Thanks
question.
everybody for tuning in as well. I think it's important to think about where we are as a province with what's going on. There are many things that people are concerned about in BC. There's many things that have been said about me as a leader. And I can tell you something, as the Conservative Party of British Columbia, we are laser focused on the people of this province. 1 in 3 people are thinking about leaving this province. 1 in 2 youth can't see a future by staying in British Columbia. This, to me, is what needs to change. As a government, a Conservative Party will make sure that we're laser focused on people, on making sure that we meet their needs. There are many issues that people raise, but I tell you, when I go across this province, whether it's in Vancouver Island, or whether it's the Lower Mainland, or whether it's the North or the Okanagan, it's the same issue. People are struggling to put food on the table. That's why we come forward with cutting the carbon tax. That'll save $1,200 per family in a year. That's why we've put forward the Rustad rebate to reduce the burden of whether you're renting or paying a mortgage, which is $3,000 per year that will be saved. $1,800. That'll be $3,000. Significant amount of money to be able to help people in this province.
No tax on tips.
Thank you.
Don't forget that
Mr.
one.
Rustad.
Wow. Throw that one out there.
Ms. Firstenow,
they
the
doing
size
that? I
of
thought
your
that was a
caucus
Trump
in the
thing.
legislature.
Okay.
No,
is
that's
down
a
to just
Rustad
two,
thing too.
yourself and Adam Olson, who's
Because I don't
chosen
care about
one
first note, I
again.
just want to
Your
comment on the
former
fact that
leader,
everyone's
Andrew
podiums are the
Bigger,
same
is endorsing
size, which
the
makes Eby look
Conservatives
really
this time.
lanky.
Why would voters consider the Green Party?
It does not come up high enough.
Good evening, and I
No,
would
it
say
doesn't.
that the need to consider voting for the Green Party is that we are getting
For
a
solar.
lack of leadership
For
from the other
windmills.
two leaders. And I just want to talk
First
about
to know.
the answers they just
Yeah.
gave. David
If
Eby
anyone
says
voted for
people
the
need
Green
help
Party,
right
she'd
now,
be the
but
first to know.
there are people working for social development poverty reduction being paid $40 an hour to deny $40 credits to people who need emergency groceries. When John
Why do we
Rustad
need
says
emergency groceries
he's
when the
laser
government
focused on the people, I wonder which
We need
people
better
he's
grocery
talking about,
prices.
because it's certainly not people who are struggling. It's certainly not people
Which are tied to fuel
who
costs.
can't pay the rent. It's certainly not people who need help when it comes to mental health and healthcare. What these two are offering is either more of the same or back to the past with John Rustad, who's been in the legislature since 2005, who is part of the government that cut services, that cut funding to education, that took away the help and supports that people need, so that we find
the guy that
ourselves
took
now
a
23
party that
years
was polling at
downstream from the
zero and
BC
brought it
Liberal
to a
government,
contender of
and
this
7 years
this whole
downstream from an
election.
NDP government that hasn't been willing to do enough to change things.
She
That's
picked
why
the
we
wrong
need
day
Greens
to
in the
wear a
legislature.
black.
Thank you. And now a
coat.
question to all of you. Recent polling
It looks like
indicates
there's her
that
head
none
and
of you have a
hands just
clear
coming out of the
lead in the
darkness.
public's hearts.
Yeah.
Over the last week, British Columbians' views of you have worsened more than they've improved.
This
over
outfit
the
too
last
is like
few
a
weeks. To
like
the
what a monk would
undecided
wear,
voter,
right? A
how
little
do
bit
each of
at the
you
Westminster Abbey or
differentiate
something,
yourselves
but,
from one
yeah.
another? Each of you will answer this question, leaders. We're going to start with you, Ms. Firstenow, then Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby.
The way we differentiate ourselves is that we focus on a future that BC could have. We focus on recognizing what's gotten us here, understanding the complex problems we face, the serious
I
problems
don't
we
like this
face
type
with
of language. It's
affordability,
just
with
too
climate
broad.
change,
It
with
just
lack of
doesn't,
healthcare. And then we propose solutions
Pacific
that are
Green Party
actually
does not
going
have
to
a
get us
specific
out of these
audience
crises.
at all.
We
Right,
cannot
right.
pretend that climate change isn't real. We cannot pretend that climate change is real and the solution is to build more fossil fuel infrastructure. We have to focus
You
on
can't tax
recognizing
the
that to
weather
serve
away. You can't
the people of
change the weather
BC,
with
to
taxes.
serve the
Come
future
on.
This
of
one
this
wants to
province,
build
we
solar
need
panels
politicians
and
who
windmills
take the
and
role
stuff like that.
seriously
What an
and who
environmental
move
waste
beyond
that is, too.
slogans and
Already
telling us what we want
98%
to hear
renewable in
and
BC.
recognize that we need a
Pretty
plan
nice.
for the future. We are the only party
How much of a
that has
dent
a
are we going to
serious
make in
platform
global
that is
carbon emissions by
costed
getting rid of the
and
other
that focuses
2%?
on getting us
We
to
shouldn't
a
even
much
have a
better
carbon
place in this
tax.
province.
India, Russia,
to you,
China
Mr.
doesn't have
Rustad.
one, neither does
Thank
the
you very
US.
much. And when I look at what's going on in
China
British
already has a
Columbia
communist
today, there are
government.
people dying on the
Oh,
streets.
yeah.
Also, our
People dying on the streets,
overall
whether it's from
emissions only go
crime
up because we
or
keep
whether it's
adding
drugs. I was
population.
on my way over
Our per
here,
cap is going
and at the
down.
corner of
Right.
Robson and Hornby, there's an individual who died. And there was emergency people rushing. This person died from an overdose. This is the British Columbia that David Eby has created. Tent cities are growing all over the place.
Yeah.
We have a crisis in healthcare. We've got a crisis in affordability. We've
This
got a
is going to look
crisis in
so
housing.
good. You have
What we need
first no talking
is
about
a
climate
common
change, and
sense
you're going to have
plan
Eby
that is
probably
going
talk
to be
about
able to
something
deliver
similarly
for
pathetic,
people in this
where
province.
Rustad's actually talking
British
about something
Columbia
that
has all the potential
Right.
you could ever want. We have all the resources that we could ever want. We've got a well-trained, well-educated population, but we're hopelessly
We're
managed.
adding color.
What's needed in British Columbia is a government that will tackle these issues, that will make sure we get government out of the way, and that we make sure that people can once again be proud to be British Columbia and to be able to build a future here.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. Mr. Eby.
Thanks. There are
at the
huge
podium.
challenges
It doesn't come
in
up
our
to his
province,
waist.
and they're not unique
he
to
is
our
6'8"
province,
or
whether it's the
whatever.
cost of living,
Usually they try and give
challenges
you like
around getting the
each podium
doctors and
made for
nurses
you.
that we need to ensure our healthcare system delivers care for you and your family when and where
They're
you need it.
pre-made, those ones.
The issue of affordable housing. These are critical challenges, and we can solve these problems. In fact,
do it.
we're starting to turn the corner on some of them. For example,
Not
connected
until the election,
250,000
Anita.
people
Not until the
to
election.
family doctoring last year. We're going to connect another 160,000 in the next 6 months. Well, every British Columbian who wants a family doctor will be able to have one by the end of 2025 at the pace we're going right now. What you hear from John Rustad,
A lot of doctors out of
conspiracy
work.
theories,
Doctors are
division,
leaving. They're not coming
cuts.
here.
Yeah.
It's not going to solve the problems that we face. We got to take these problems head on, and we've got to do so much more.
You created
we
the
can
problems,
solve these
you
problems together.
giraffe.
Thank you, Mr. Eby. So
Sure.
now it's time for you leaders
Like a
to
giraffe.
debate, and here's how this is supposed to work. Everyone's microphones will be on. What I would ask is that you allow each other to finish at least a first thought for the first person who starts, because somebody's got to start, and then the rest of you can jump in. So Mr. Rustad, you're going to open this debate section. How do you respond to what you've heard so far from Mr. Eby and Ms. Firstenow?
Well, clearly, when I think about British Columbia, and I think about the fact that 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving British Columbia, that to me is a failure of leadership. It's weak leadership in British Columbia. People should be able to hope and build a dream here. Today in British Columbia, there is close to half the people that have passed because of an overdose in Canada, right here in British Columbia. It is failures of government policy. We need to make sure that we can build hope for people. We need to make sure that we can unleash our resources and our economy so that people can build that hope.
It's
and
astonishing.
build that
It
future.
really is astonishing to hear John Rustad always talk about how many young people want to leave BC, but never talk about investing in young people, never talking about investing in education, never talk about investing in making sure there's enough psychologists and counselors in our schools, never talk about ensuring that university and post-secondary are affordable for people, and never talk about how we're really going to make sure that housing is affordable in this province, which is to get non-market housing in, to put vacancy control in place, and to stop real estate investment trusts from driving up housing prices and rents in this province. He never talks about solutions. He talks about all the problems.
Why doesn't he talk about the failed solutions that we've been implementing?
Right.
I feel like I live in a different place from John Rustad. His vision of BC is one that is dark and
he's
gloomy.
going for him.
We need a vision of hope. If we want young people to stay here, we have to give them a reason to stay.
Shachi, we need hope and a plan. And that's what we're delivering for young people.
Oh, this is the free-for-all section where all mics are hot.
Look, you can't even see. You can't even see the podium in his shot
from it fully until
Yes, true,
2029.
true.
People need support right now. It also excludes young people. If you're working and you're living with parents, if you're
But
in a
John Rustad
multi-generational
has such
home,
good
you
manners.
won't benefit
He's
at all
not
from
the
this
type
plan.
to
Who
interrupt. So
benefits
this
the most?
free-for-all, they're
If
going
you
to
own
like
a
ambush him on the
penthouse
free-for-all.
downtown
I think.
Vancouver, you benefit the most
Get in there, John.
from his tax cut. But if you're sharing a home, you don't.
Dave says
That doesn't make any sense.
No interest in
Young
actually.
people need support.
Let these two
And,
like talk. Yeah, let
John
them
Rustad's housing
talk
plan.
over
Globe
each
Mail
other.
says
Keep going.
it's not going to build a single unit of housing. He himself says
David
it's
has
not the premier's
this
job
weird kind of
to
like
ensure affordable housing. Well, that's
casual
what
arrogance
exactly
that,
what
like,
got us
Menchie
into this
has
thing.
in
But
others.
if
When
we
we were in
were
government,
concerned-
you didn't think it was your
concerned
job.
about that wealth, we would be taxing that wealth. There's no plan in the NDP platform.
We're
There's
being
no
told to shush
conservative
while
platform
the
so
debate's
far.
happening.
But if we were concerned about that enormous accumulation of wealth, if we were concerned about the growing inequality and the growing poverty, we would be looking at ways to actually tax some of that wealth. We have that in our platform.
Wow, tax that
Silence
wealth.
from the NDP.
So look,
silence
it's
from the
clear what
Conservatives.
The NDP have just said and what David Eby just said. David Eby actually said the private sector has no place in
Oh
housing.
my
And
goodness,
that's
why is
just
David
wrong.
Did I
ending
say
with
that?
Yes, you did, Mr. Eby. The reality as well is this. We are going to cut the carbon tax by getting rid of the carbon taxes in British Columbia. That will save $1,200 for a family today. And yet David Eby, he wants to actually double the
Good
carbon
David.
tax in his next
John.
term. That is what he has said he will do. And so this is the reality we're facing in British Columbia. That is more money just in the carbon tax saving alone than what he is proposing with his taxes. And for him to come out and say that $900 right away for the Rustad rebate in terms of
It's
the
not right
rent
away, John.
and in terms of mortgages, those are
not right
people,
away.
hardworking people in British Columbia that will get that benefit right away. And I wish we could bring the whole thing in, except that the fiscal mismanagement and a $14 billion deficit being proposed by David Eby will take away the future of people.
Stevie, you seem to want to respond.
Well, I don't
looks
even
like
know
an
where to
adult.
start here,
David
Shachi.
Eby's like his
John Rustad
adolescent
can't get rid of
son
the carbon tax because the
geeking
federal
at him.
backstop.
Yep.
He also is not telling you the full story about his Rustad long wait, that you don't actually see a benefit until at the earliest 2026. And then only if you own your home or if you have high rental costs. If you're living in a rural part of British Columbia and you have low rent, you see the least amount of benefit. And that's why there's a guy with an $80 million house in my constituency that loves John Rustad. But I'm on your side.
That's why
you and your families at home to make sure you get access to immediate benefit from the tax cut.
Look, we have
not
the largest
2 years from now, not 5 years from
We
now.
have
but
the
right away.
largest, probably most violent hurricane lining up off the coast of Florida, and we have 2 leaders retreating from climate action in this province.
Okay, well, leaders, that brings to a close our first round of open
That's a
debate.
clueless
But
one.
I think you'll like
Wow,
this.
really
The next
ended
theme
with
is
that.
housing affordability. So you get to
First
talk a
note
little
end
bit
that
more about
segment
it.
is taking a belly flop
Housing
into
in
the
BC
debate
is the
pool.
most expensive in North America.
Okay, I can pause this because it's live, but I can run it on
Hurricanes,
in
really,
fast time.
hurricanes.
But,
I just
wasn't
want-
David Eby. The framing of David Eby there, just like he honestly reminds me a lot of Al Gore as well in the 2000 debates with George W. Bush. If you guys know that, he would love to walk up to people during those sort of debates where people can walk around the room a little bit. He'd always walk directly up to the person to like intimidate them, and that's like what Eby was doing there, where he's like turning over to John to like stare at him like as if I don't think anything of you. He's so adolescently arrogant.
He is, and then this is a bullying tactic too. And this whole keeping everybody's mic hot so they jump on in. This is not good. But anyway, we could get back to it because then if we pause, well, you decide, Clyde, right? Like what you want.
Well, yeah, we don't have to pause for very long. I just wanted to get
Yeah.
some of the conjecture in there before we move on to the next segment here.
Because I don't like how they cut the mics in the US. And now what they're doing is a different tactic, leaving the mics open, leaving it hot. It's like a free for all. But some people don't do well in that environment. I don't think I would because I don't like interrupting. And, go ahead.
I like it, though, at least in the sense like David Eby is coming off so bad.
And Sonia, too. They're just arguing it. And John, let him fall. Let him do it. Yeah.
First Know is a very typical, like, square, overly like what's the word for it, sanctimonious type of a green NDP leader in terms of you get a lot of green NDP leaders who are like this, and then David Eby like saying, well, what do you think about that, John? Well, John is like John Rustad's actually talking to people and telling them what his ideas are. David Eby's like poking at people on stage, and then First Know keeps going on her like university student union diatribes.
That's right.
Pit Sky P with a $10 super chat says, my work coach picked up and moved her family from Alberta to BC last year because she was tired of the Conservatives. I can only imagine her face now.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
We'll see how that goes for her. But let's get back to the debate and see where they're at.
It's an issue that links the economy and quality of life. It links the economy to quality of life. Each of you have called it a crisis. Mr. Rustad, the first question comes to you. You say you will undo NDP policies, including rent caps, restrictions on short-term rentals, and allowing more density on single-family lots. How would removing these measures help with affordability? What is your plan for housing?
So Sachi, thank you very much for the question. To start with, we did not say we'll remove rent caps, and we're not going to remove rent caps. That's something that's very clear to be done, that needs to be done in British Columbia. When we look at housing in this province, we have a government, David Eby, that is saying it was, first of all, it was foreigners, and then it was speculators, and then it was vacant properties, and then it was Airbnbs. Instead of pointing at the real problem, which is government, and government is getting in the way. It takes far too long to get permits in this province. It takes far too long to get housing built in this province. We're going to come to communities with $1 billion a year to be able to invest in things like water and sewer upgrades so that we can clean up the backlog that's needed, so that the investment can be there for densification. We're going to work with communities on zoning so that we can zone for densification, as opposed to David Eby's approach of just overriding local governments. Working with local governments is critical because we also need to make sure local governments can get the permitting process done much faster. It's also why we're looking at using the old MERV program, the multi-unit residential buildings. This is a program that was very successful building rental units across this country. It's critical to bring that back and get the rental stock that we need built here in British Columbia. We have a plan and we will deliver on housing.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. Mr. Eby, many people today will never be able to afford the same kind of housing their parents had. What do you say to those who feel upward mobility is no longer an option in British Columbia, that they have no choice but to lower their expectations when it comes to where and how they live?
Well, I believe that one of the foundational requirements for a decent life in our province is a good place to live, and that it's actually a core responsibility of anybody who wants to be premier. It's why I got into politics. This is what drives me, is making sure that you and your family have a good place to live. There's a strong contrast here. John Rustad explicitly said he doesn't think that it's the premier's job to help deliver affordable housing. Well, our plan will deliver 300,000 middle-income homes. That's what experts are saying. In addition, we're expediting construction by investing in modular housing construction so that housing can be built faster and cheaper. We're preserving
trailers,
lower cost rental housing.
Containers.
So that a senior who sees that for sale sign go up out front of the rental building doesn't fear that they're going to end up in a shelter. These are basic things, and we're making sure to deliver for British Columbians on them. We've got so much more to do. Our plan to get people an opportunity to buy their first home, to address Airbnb, to address speculation, people leaving homes vacant in our market. It's delivered 20,000 homes for people, and John Rustad wants to get rid of all of those things. Doesn't make any sense.
Thanks, Mr. Eby. Ms. Firstenow, your party calls for measures to cool the market in order to make housing more affordable for everyone. But how do you do that without devaluing what is often a person's
totally reading the
financial investment?
She needs to turn to the
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for us to recognize that when people can't afford to live in British Columbia, our economy is not going to be able to be strong. We are going to see ourselves further and further away from the province that we want to be. In Victoria, rents have more than doubled in the last 7 years. We're in an emergency where people can't afford to live here. And so what we are proposing is immediately put in rent caps between tenancies. This is where the rents are being jacked up in between tenancies. It's an incentive to evict.
Oh yeah, that's why
non-market housing, we need to build tens of thousands of units of non-market housing every year to put a check on the cost, especially of rental housing. We have a median income in BC of 44,000 people, half of $44,000. Half the people in this province earn less than $44,000. They don't have an affordable place to live. It's an emergency. We can address this in a way that protects the people of British Columbia, but we have to stop protecting real estate investment trusts
to give
and investors
credit where credit is due. That's not a bad idea. Or rent
of housing in this province.
Thank you, Ms. Firstenow. And now a question, the same question to all of you in terms of order. We'll start with Mr. Eby, then Ms. Firstenow, then coming back to Mr. Rustad. Here is your question. The pendulum on housing policy has swung from market-driven to much more government interventionist. Nothing appears to be working. Is it time to go back to letting the market decide?
Yes.
Or is it time for even greater government intervention?
I'll give her credit. That's a good question.
Thanks, Shachi.
She didn't
There's
write
no
it.
one solution to the housing crisis.
I'm going to do a bit of column A and column B. That's what I'm going to do.
Stop peeking behind the curtains, Anita. Let's just pretend she did it.
The way we got here is so many different challenges wrapped up together. We have to go after all of them. You can't just choose one. So if you're a builder, if you're a drywaller or a painter or a carpenter, you build homes. We want you out there building to make sure that people have a chance to build a good life for themselves and their family. We don't want you tied up in endless permit processes. John Rustad's advocating. Let's get building those homes, those 300,000.
He just said he would do the opposite.
Sonia's right.
That's right.
We need to lean on the nonprofit sector. We need to have non-market housing. And we also need to be innovative, making sure, like we are with 5,000 units every year, that people can buy into market at 40% below market value. supporting them to get out of rental housing.
That's not actually how that will work. If the
They'll do all the
government is
things
signing for
for British
40%, people will just
Ms.
buy
Christinell.
more expensive, and everything will become more
Neither
expensive
of
because
these
the government's paying for
other
40%.
leaders want to talk about the role that financialized investors, real estate investment trusts, are playing in BC. In 20 years, 59% of rental housing was purchased by real estate investment trusts. We have global capital coming to BC, buying up housing, and it is not being used to ensure that people have a place to live. It's being used to ensure that shareholders get their profits delivered.
By the way, this is just
It's
not
something
true.
I've been asking David Eby about
Ownership
since
of
2018,
properties
when
is
he was
actually
Minister
very
of Housing, when he
rural,
was
unless
Attorney
they were the
General.
ones who built it
What is the
themselves.
province going to do to put protections around the people, as opposed to letting these investment bodies turn our housing into a commodity and use it entirely for shipping profits to shareholders, who most of whom aren't even part of BC?
Shelley
Thank you,
Duvall,
Mr. Rustad.
Thank
challenging
you.
role,
You
yeah,
know,
to the Green Party.
I want to
leader.
start off by saying is 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving British Columbia because they can't
Just
afford to live
bring
here and
that
they've got
same
no
thing
hope
up.
to buy a house. I love my wife. I love my nieces and nephews. I miss the fact that I wasn't able to have children. But I think any parent would want to do everything they can to make sure that there's an opportunity for their kids to be able to build a future here in British Columbia. And I will ask you this, in 7 years of NDP government, has anything been better? Is housing improved? Housing has been
Very
in a
good line.
crisis. We've seen a 30% decline just this year on housing starts. And I talk to people, there are tens of thousands of housing units that have started and are now defunct, that are not going ahead in British Columbia. This is failure of policy. This is why
Price
the
of Achilles
Conservatives
and crack
have a
pipes is way
common sense
down.
plan to unleash the potential of the private sector to build that housing, to build those rental units, to make sure that people can have a home here, to make sure that our kids can stay here in British Columbia.
Thank you, Mr.
was
Rustad.
just
Now
good.
time for
There's nothing
more
to say about
open
that.
debate, and we will begin this time with you, Ms. Firstenau.
Okay, I'm going to pause it before this open debate, and let's just get into a bit of back and forth. I think John's not giving a very good debate against the points that they're bringing up, because they're bringing up a lot of BS, in my opinion, from David Eby and Ms. Firstenau. I don't think that more government would be the correct solution. I think more government is just going to be more of an exacerbation of this stuff. Anita, you actually even were keen on the idea of rent caps. I don't think that'll help. I think what'll happen is people will look at the properties that they're getting into and they'll say, okay, forget it. I'm not going to be landlord. They'll just get rid of rental stocks. That'll just go away. They'll go into just sales and speculation back into that marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't really know, because I'm not a renter, but like, I know that I have a friend that lives in a basement suite for $2,000. Like, next year, is that going to be $2,100, $2,200? Is that
Well, and the
fair?
problem is the person who owns that property, their property taxes are going up at the same rate that the rent is, and that's always the problem. Is that, and the thing is that I think the thing with rent caps is that
Well,
you
I pay
can't
property tax, and I wouldn't charge somebody that much money because I'm not greedy. But go
I
ahead.
agree, though, but the thing is that, if part of your business, your
I would.
livelihood is being able to actually live off of properties that you own and manage, which is a real job. There's a lot of work that goes into many of these people who own several properties and manage them. The thing is, I would agree, you can't just get rid of property rent caps without also getting property tax and taxes overall lowered. Both of those things need to happen at the same time, just simply because right now we're having a price spiral because of taxes that's then being passed on to renters. So it's more so that one thing should not be done without the other. I don't believe in rent caps, but the thing is that prices going up means that we're going to have rents keep spiking unless both of those things are handled. So just less regulation, less government, overall less taxes is always going to make sure that more people can actually afford their rents.
So measures that have come in from the governments in the past just 12 months have actually led to more renters losing their long-term rentals. I'm one of them. When it was the rules changed in British Columbia recently, where after a certain date, then if a landlord wanted to kick you out, they'd have to give you 12, or they'd have to have you out of the property for 12 months before they could do something else with the property. Previously, it was 6 months. So a lot of landlords just kicked their tenants out. And that's where I found myself. And what happened to us? Our rent went up by $20,000 this year. It's just made it completely unaffordable to live in this province. And by adding more government, that's just going to get in the way of these renters or these landlords that, you know, they're trying to turn a buck. It's just going to make things more incumbent on them, or cumbersome for them to actually even turn a profit. So they'll either get out of the industry and rental stock goes away, or they'll do things like evict their tenants and then get the maximum they can before any more government comes in and puts rental,
this is what
price
happens
fixing
in New
on
York
this stuff.
too, is that you have a certain percentage of new units on the market that are that are rent capped, but then the rest of them become luxury priced to make up for the fact that a bunch of the units the landlord effectively doesn't make any money on. And so you have this massive gap in places like New York City. And oftentimes the people who get rent controlled units tend to be the people who don't even in theory need them. But because you're more, maybe you are a higher earning person, you know the system really well, you work a more sophisticated job. Usually it's more sophisticated people who are able to exploit the rules around rent capping, and the people who genuinely maybe should be paying a little bit less, they're the ones who don't get the units.
Yeah, they call Greenwich Village rent control village now, right? Because it's a whole bunch of 70-year-olds that have been on rent control since the 60s.
Yeah, and they'll never leave.
They'll never.
I have an aunt in Ontario that's in a rent control place. She wants to be closer to her sister, but she can't because she'll never be able to. She'll never be able to go anywhere else.
But on the before we replay. On the subject of public housing, Clyde, as you may recall, 6 months ago, I did a story on the tiny homes project in Kelowna.
Yes.
And they spent, I think it was $21 million to create 60 tiny homes and to buy 3 ATCO trailers that you can buy on Kijiji for 10 grand each.
Yeah. They're super cheap, just like bungalows.
Dilapidated, used ATCO trailers at a cost of $1 million each. It's just insane. This government is just completely incompetent.
That's what I'm saying. It might be a very Pollyanna view, but it's too much for people to afford compared to the wages, and you have nowhere else to go if your landlord decides to kick you out. And what people are paying in rents to rent a bedroom and rent a basement suite and stuff like that is absolutely ridiculous, off the charts. And I think this is fueled by greed. You can say it's the market, it's what the market dictates. I know, but the market has gone bananas. Not what you're paying.
A lot of it's government greed through property tax rises to pay for garbage that nobody asked for.
That's true. That's true.
I'm a homeowner and it's a lot. But,
Angela Cordoso for $5 says, it seems like the question to Rustad is trying to set him up for a gotcha type answer. It looks like that's how they've been doing it the whole evening. Maxime Pressenelt with a $5 super chat says, Eby can't spend money on rehab for addicts, but can throw away $12 million on helicopters and AR-15s to eradicate deer that hunters would do for free. That happened in British Columbia.
Wow.
Pet Sky P with a $10 super chat says, rent controls kneecap people. I live in a cheap duplex. If rent ever went up, I would still be there. I worked hard. Now I live in a house in Calgary. I have a wife, dog, and a family. Well, that's
I was going to say though, I think that John Rustad's been doing a good job of just, again, seeming like the adult in the room. Eby's trying to needle people in a way that I think that you always have to think about in the vision of a middle class voter who's genuinely undecided between the NDP and the Conservatives. They look at John as a professional. Frankly, it even looks like John probably got a haircut this morning. It's even much more kept. He looks very professional. Eby seems very, again, adolescent would be how I'd talk about his performance, everywhere, staring at people, jabbing. And then First to Know is trying to out progressive Eby. So she's actually delivering a lot of the policy failures record of Eby to him, but then advocating for more government. So she's almost doing a lot of John's job for him. At the same time, she's then ripping away progressive left voters by saying, hey, you're caving to the developers and to profiteers and whatnot. So, and I've door knocked a lot. There are a lot of voters who I guarantee you, they're NDP people who don't want to admit the NDP failed. So they're saying the NDP didn't live up to the true vision, even though they did. And now they're voting Green instead.
Oh, no.
Well, let's get back to it.
Now, John loves to talk about unleashing the private sector, which is what the BC Liberals did when he was in power, when he was part of that government in the 2000s. Unleashing the private sector means more profits for the private sector and more lack of affordability for the people in BC. John doesn't want to just unleash the private sector more in housing, which has gotten us to exactly where we are today, a housing market that is entirely run by the private sector. He wants to unleash the private sector in healthcare. He wants to put that profit margin on top of healthcare delivery. And we see what that has done in Alberta, where wait times for surgeries have gone up and numbers of surgeries have gone down and the costs have gone up. That's what unleashing the private sector looks like. That's what John Rustad wants to do.
So thank you. And
I know that's just
I look at
wrong.
unleashing
Our
the private
surgery
sector.
wait times have gone down.
There's no question in my mind. You look at the housing in British Columbia, it was built by the private sector. The private sector has to play an important role. And it's not big companies, it's mom and pop, whether they're investing in a second home or whether they're building an extra unit. It is small business, it's small companies, it is large companies. We need the full mix in British Columbia. And the reality is, when I talk to people that want to build homes in this province, they say it takes too long. It takes 4 to 7 years or longer.
So then, John, why are you putting more red tape in their way? Why are you trying to undo?
We need to get government out of the way and make sure that we can unleash it. And this is why we have to work with municipalities, not run roughshod over them or bully them. We need to work with municipalities to get the permitting process cleaned up. You know, in Vancouver, if I could just add one quick point.
We need the housing now.
In Vancouver, they have 274 bylaws associated with housing, and over 70 people have to touch a project. It's no wonder it takes years, if not a decade, to get housing projects built.
Okay, I think Mr. Eby wants to respond.
Thanks. I met Andrew, who moved into a rental place that he could afford. It's close to work. It used to be an Airbnb. And when we brought in our Airbnb rules, the owner converted it to long-term rental. It was him plus 2 other people moved into long-term rentals. When we brought in the speculation and vacancy tax to deal with vacant homes, people buying homes, just leaving them empty, condos and whole houses, 20,000 British Columbians moved in and started renting those homes. These initiatives work. And housing is hard right now. It's hard for people. We got to do so much more. But can you imagine how much harder it'll be in a world where there's no restriction on Airbnb rentals, where there's no speculation and vacancy tax? John Rustad's committed. He spoke against it since 2018.
That's simply not
true. And the
true.
speculators and the investors love his plans.
Mr. Eby,
but I'm on the side of you and your family.
Simply not true. The reality is Airbnbs are licensed by municipalities. Airbnbs are zoned by municipalities. They just go up anywhere. This is something that's within local governments. But once again, David Eby's approach is just to be an authoritarian. My perspective is quite simple on this. We've seen a 30% decline in housing. This year, it's anticipated there'll be less than 17,000 housing starts in British Columbia. We need to be seeing 30, 40, or 50,000 housing starts.
But John, why didn't you do that in the 16 years you were in government? We wouldn't be in this mess.
In 2017, they promised 114,000 homes. And what did they build? I think about 14,000. Now he's promising 300,000. You cannot trust David Eby to be able to deliver these numbers because he is too comfortable with it.
That neither of them are interested in protecting the affordable housing that we have. That's vacancy control. When Bill 44 and all the housing legislation that the NDP brought out last year, when Adam Olsen spent hours and hours going back and forth with Ravi Kahlon, Ravi admitted in the end, none of these measures were going to bring affordability. So let's be clear. These two don't have a plan for affordable housing. They want to talk about housing supply. They want to talk about housing starts, but they do not want to protect the affordable housing that we have. They do not want to ensure that we're making affordable housing available to people who need it right now.
Mr. Eby.
Affordable housing is important, but it's also important for people to be able to buy a place affordably. That's why we have a proposal for 5,000 units a year to get people out of the rental market into a place at 40%
Not when they're competing with real estate
rest
investment
assured,
trusts, they're not.
if John Rustad's elected and gets rid of all of these measures,
One at a time, leaders.
so much harder.
All right, I'm going to give you a little bit more time, Mr. Rustad. We do have a bit of time if you want to briefly respond to that.
Sure. Clearly in British Columbia, 5,000 starts is not what we need. We need 30, 40, or 50,000 housing starts in British Columbia. This is why we have the Rustad rebate, so that your rent and your mortgage can be written off so that you get a rebate on that right away to make life more affordable for people in BC.
Okay, and we've got to keep moving. Lots more to get to, and now we are moving on to healthcare. Roughly 1 in 5 British Columbians either don't have a family doctor or can't get in to see one when they need to. And my first question is to you, Mr. Rustad.
Quick question.
You've committed to expanding private.
Yeah.
So
yeah, jump in there.
This Rustad rebate. As a former banker, my concern is if you get a rebate for a mortgage, why wouldn't you, if it's cost effective, if you're mortgage free, not just take out a mortgage and just get some free government money?
Well, I'd assume presumably you're taking your mortgage has interest on the cost of the mortgage that you have. I would say that even then, the amount of money that I
would assume it would apply to the principal and the interest.
Yeah, sure, but I would say that the amount of people who would actually be even willing to do that would be minimal. Like maybe you could make.
You'd be surprised, Wyatt.
Yeah.
Anytime there's a loophole, they're lining up at the door.
I think it would probably be that. I think it probably applies to something like a first-time house, or that you actually have to have a new property. It can't be like you're taking a line of credit or mortgage on your own home.
Right, but I think it's kind of a silly idea, because then who's going to monitor that? You're going to end up with more government. Right?
I'd say at the end of the day, really, honestly, don't monitor it. If people are able to save more of their own money, I think that's the goal at the end of the day. Because
Okay.
I would just say, again, that was just so bad from David Eby. I just posted it on Twitter a second ago. He comes up so bad in this debate. Like, people are saying Sonya's bad, and while that's true, she is bad. She comes out really stiff and just sanctimonious, just like she's above it all on everyone. She's more principled than you are. Eby doesn't let people finish. He comes in like somebody who thinks he knows everything. At the same time, every single person watching this, who's again truly undecided, doesn't think he's done well enough to act like this. This is the thing with the attack ad from the NDP. You have to earn the right for a good attack ad. Like Harper in 2011 going after Michael Ignatieff, the just visiting ads they did, brilliant, because Harper had the track record to back up that kind of ad, and Ignatieff did not, and he's very high-handed with how he speaks to people. David Eby does not have the right to talk to anybody like this.
Yeah, to be arrogant when you're the incumbent and you're running against your own record. You're saying, "Oh, everything's terrible," and I'm in charge.
It's your track record. You're the one responsible. If you've been in power 2 years and you've done this is the state of BC, you're pretty arrogant to sit there and act all smug about it.
And him acting like, why didn't you do something about it, Mr. Rustad 16 years ago?
You had nothing to do.
It wasn't a problem 16 years ago.
By the way, I'd love to go back to 2005. That sounds great.
Absolutely.
To me. And
that brings up another point. Sorry, Wyatt, keep going.
I was just going to finish off there that Eby, his attitude makes you think that if I just presented these three leaders, didn't tell you what parties they were in charge of, you'd think he was the leader of the fringe party with only a couple of seats.
Oh, absolutely. And this phrase, affordable housing, is very uniquely British Columbian nomenclature. Like this phrase doesn't even exist outside of BC. Because housing is affordable. It's just assumed all housing is affordable. If you can't find a place on this street, you can find a place on that street. Only in BC does this phrase even make sense. Housing by its very nature should be affordable.
Unhoused. We've got a lot of unhoused now.
I don't understand how we have a debate about the housing crisis and don't ever bring up the massive influx of people that are coming into Canada and the province.
They should just do what Jagmeet Singh recommends and make it all affordable.
They got to stop building expensive houses. Just make cheap houses. That's where you go. Anyway, let's get back to this.
Healthcare delivery. How can you ensure those who can't pay have the same access to the speed and standard of care as those who can?
We are committed to universal health care.
I would just say that doesn't matter.
It's one payer, which is the government. Government pays the bill. But we have the second most expensive healthcare system, and we're getting second worst outcomes. We are in a crisis in BC. We're in a crisis. ER rooms are closed all across this province. In the city of Merritt, between now and Christmas, it's anticipated there'll be 32 more days of closure of an ER room. It could take 8, 10, 12 hours or longer to wait for emergency rooms. People have died waiting in emergency rooms. There was a lady She was in labor. She went into the hospital, and she miscarried in the washroom and sat there with covered in blood, waiting for hours for services in an emergency room. That is David Eby's healthcare in BC. And quite frankly, it really tears me apart and it makes me upset. We need to be able to make sure that we're retaining our doctors, that we're bringing back the healthcare workers that were let go. We need to make sure we have a model in this province where doctors want to stay here and work, where people can come in and we can unleash the full potential of family doctors. We need to be able to make sure we deal with training and the people coming into our province. There's so much that needs to be done on healthcare, and it's not happening under David Eby.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rusted. To you, Mr. Eby, third-party delivery exists in Australia, in the UK, in Germany, and it's already here in British Columbia. In coming out so strongly against alternative care models, including privatization, are you putting ideology above the needs of British Columbians?
No, not at all, Shachi. When people need care, we're going to make sure we're doing everything we can to deliver care. That story that John just told is horrific. Every British Columbian deserves high quality care no matter where you are in the province. People who are, when we weren't hitting cancer treatment timelines, we reached down to Bellingham and we retained a private clinic to be able to make sure that people were getting the care that they need. It's not about ideology. We have a shortage of healthcare workers. We've got to train up more healthcare workers. We've got to recognize the credentials of those healthcare workers who want to work in our province from other parts of Canada, from other countries,
or from
leading the country in recruiting healthcare professionals. We've got to do more. And I'll tell you, we're not going to get there by cutting the healthcare system. As John Rustad's proposal, he keeps releasing numbers consistent with cutting billions of dollars from our healthcare system. He hasn't released his costed platform. We got to hire more doctors and nurses. We can't be competing with the private sector who's going to pay those same doctors and nurses more. And then all of a sudden, you have to pay more to access those doctors and nurses.
That's what they do currently.
That's why we're opening a new medical school in Surrey to train up community healthcare workers, doctors and nurses to work across BC. Incentives for working in rural BC and provisional license so those professionals can get to work right away.
Thanks, Mr. Eby. Ms. Furstenau, you've described the current healthcare system as a bloated bureaucracy. You're also campaigning on establishing an integrated community health center in every riding in British Columbia. So how exactly do you plan to do that without adding to said health bureaucracy?
The great thing about community health centers is that they don't actually need heavy bureaucracy on top of them the way that
we just need the farmers market approach to everything.
The invention of the NDP.
Oh, we just need smaller
NDP seem to have approached healthcare with the idea that there's nothing that one more VP and 7 more project managers can't solve, when in fact what we have to do is ensure that healthcare spending is being focused on the delivery of healthcare by the professionals who were trained to do it. Healthcare professionals in our province. We've seen the corporatization of healthcare under the NDP. We've seen the growth of TELUS, Health Plus. They were investigated only because the BC Greens wouldn't relent on asking the questions of why they were allowed to double bill. We've seen the growth of agency nurses. We see that both of these two parties are aligned on corporate delivery of healthcare, whereas with community health centers, you treat it like we treat the public education system. There's infrastructure, the doctors, the nurse practitioners, nurses, allied health professionals.
Talking about the elephant in the room as to why we have a shortage.
We see already they're hugely successful. We can get 93 up and running because it's the model that we use for our MLA offices. It's totally possible.
Thank you, Ms. First.
Okay, so elephant in the room. Why do we have less nurses and doctors in British Columbia?
Because
they fired them.
Yeah.
The government fired them for refusing to take the vaccine.
That's right.
Even today, they said that they were lifting the vaccine, but what they've done is they've created more intrusive regulations.
Either you still have to get the vaccine, or you have to jump through like a dozen other hoops to prove immunity in some other way. And like the way they did that, if anything, it's an even bigger insult.
You have to give up your DNA for your job. What other, like, how egregious are we getting into this? Just
by the way, I actually
get out of here.
I guarantee those nurses and doctors who left who haven't come back yet, and the vast majority of them are not coming back since this announcement by Adrian Dix and Bonnie Henry have been made. If the Conservatives win, I guarantee in the next month you will see tons of people contact them saying, now I'm willing to come back because I trust you guys. And trust is a big issue here. Like, Eby, Chairman Eby and Commandant Firstino are going to be the people that you trust to let you back into the healthcare system and never mess with you again. The way they are talking about corporate hospitals and nurses, you'd think they're going to send them out to the killing fields if Firstino was the premier.
Mm-hmm. And kudos to John Rustad. He's the only politician I've ever heard say that openly, ever.
Well, David Eby talking about how it would be more expensive and how John Rustad's going to go to the free market to get more expensive doctors and have them compete. But currently, I've had Corinne Maury on the show several times to say that the nurses that are being employed, they're being employed through these contract firms, and they're being paid way more money than would they normally be through the unions. And they were fired from these unions, and the people who've come in to replace their positions are being paid 3 times as much. It's costing the government more. So yeah, it's gone up under Eby. It's his projection. It's crazy.
By the way, I had a guy who was very familiar with how the nurses union acted in the 1990s, saying they almost had like a riot back in the 90s because the union found out that more than 15% of the healthcare system's budget was being spent on management and administration. These days, I think we might even be past 50% of money spent on the healthcare system being spent on paperwork, administration, HR, and all this other stuff. That's the big problem. I actually just made a video today responding to Steve Boots, left-wing TikToker, failed teacher, whatever he is, that he was going on about how, the Saskatchewan has corporatized medical care and privatized it. Now there's all these private MRIs and they get paid more than the public system gets to deliver an MRI. I'm like, yes, but it's because those private clinics don't get their administrative costs paid for by the public. It's actually all just in a giant pool for the public. So the actual operating costs of a private office delivering these MRIs is far lower than the public system. And he never mentions the fact that Saskatchewan is actually currently the province with the shortest waiting times. The shortest. But he's like, well, they've gone up over the past 15 years. Everywhere's gone up. They are still the best performers in the country.
That's not even to say a lot, because we're the worst performers in the OECD.
You might be right. I think Ontario might be technically the shortest. I think Saskatchewan has been the one that's come down the most since.
I think we're the
and it has the
longest
oldest
in
population.
BC.
Yeah.
So that isn't even to say much to say, one province is doing better than the others, because we're the lowest in the OECD. It's crazy. And guess what? We're the only in the OECD to do. Outlaw professional private medical. We're the only country in the OECD to do that. All the other places, they have this socialized programs within their government. But you go to England or places with like NHS, you have a private option if you want to go unburden the NHS. It's true. It's there. It's available.
I know that this is a provincial, debate. So I don't want to bring federal matters into it, but a subject that's been brought up often in question period is the carbon tax is being paid by hospitals and schools. So if a hospital is paying significantly more in federal carbon tax, I know BC had a carbon tax already, but again, Rustad wants to get rid of it. Eby will only get rid of it if the federal government gets rid of it, but more money spent on carbon tax, less money spent on nurses and doctors, which is relevant as well, I think.
All right, well, let's get back into this.
Now, same question to all of you now, starting again with Ms. Firstenow, then Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby. Here's your question. The super senior wave is here. People 85 and older represent one of the fastest growing age groups in British Columbia. Options for long-term palliative or in-home care are often limited. Many people have no help. Others can only rely on their children or neighbors. What is your plan, Ms. Firstenow? First, to ensure the dignity and care to those who have given so much to this province.
Yeah, we've had a shortage of long-term thinking. We've had a shortage of governments who look at demographics, who prepare for what's coming, who try to avert crises. And now we are seeing a lot of people, a lot of seniors who aren't getting the care they need. We had the report from the Seniors Advocate, 1 Billion Reasons to Care, that showed a huge amount of public funding going to especially for-profit seniors care, where that money wasn't being used for delivery of care to service to seniors. It was being used for administration. It was being used for renovations. And so number one, we need a government that takes seriously how public money is being used to support seniors, and we need to make sure that that is being used properly. And number two, we have to find ways to support seniors at home. The best place for seniors to age is age in place. And it's horrifying right now, the story that a 95-year-old man has been evicted from his home to a hospital.
Mr.
What are
Rustad.
you going to do about
Thank
it?
you. And I need to clear the air here. We're going to be adding about $3.8 billion in healthcare spending over the next 3 years. David Eby continues to perpetuate a lie. And I just wanted to be clear on that. When it comes to seniors and what needs to be done with seniors care in this province, we've laid out a very comprehensive plan. Everything from building more long-term care facilities in this province, a commitment of 5,000 new beds. But more than that, we need to work with seniors and we need to work with families to be able to support them at home. That's why we're going to create tax credits that are available. We're going to expand services at home. A nurse came to me in my riding and she told me this story.
Yeah.
And she goes home in tears because she's been going out and she's talking to seniors and they're saying, can we please get some help? And she's saying, there's none available. I'm so sorry. That is wrong. Seniors need to be treated with respect. We need to work to be able to support them at home because we know that's where the best outcomes are. There's much more we need to do. We're expanding the SAFER program, shelter aid for elderly residents. There's a lot more that can be done and that we have a plan to be able to deliver.
And what is David
Mr.
doing
Eby.
right now?
Well, you know, it's hard to listen to John Rustad. He was in government for 16 years. And seniors who lived in long-term care homes didn't get a bath once a week. The vast majority of long-term care homes didn't meet even minimum provincial standards for care and dignity. And now he says, oh, if you send me back, I'm going to be different this time. I'm not going to cut the healthcare system. I'm not going to fire the workers who care for the seniors. The largest firing of healthcare workers happened when John Rustad was in government, and he voted for it against seniors. You deserve care at home for as long as you can be at home. That's why we've expanded home care. Our hospital at home program means you can get hospital-like care at home in BC, the first time in our province. And we've got a lot more to do, but we're meeting standards for seniors in long-term care. And we're going to keep doing that, something John Rustad never did.
So we're
You're
throwing
not
to open
addressing-
debate. We're starting with Mr. Rustad. Do you want to respond to what Mr. Eby
Sure.
just said?
I mean, first of all, what David Eby just said is not true.
90% of care homes didn't meet standards.
And I can tell you something, the care homes that were built and that were renovated in British Columbia were renovated to the standards of the day. They were good quality facilities that were built. But here's the real key in my
Good
mind.
for other people,
When you
John.
look forward at what needs to happen going forward, David Eby cannot defend the record that he has and the damage that's being done in BC, especially for seniors. Seniors need that respect and care. They can't get a doctor. When an emergency room's closed, does a senior have to go an hour and a half, 2.5 hours down the road for the next one? And that is David Eby's record. We need to make sure that those services are there and available. We also need to make sure that we're coming into their homes, providing support and working with families to make sure that support's there.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, when we were all rolling up our sleeves to get vaccines to protect vulnerable seniors from COVID-19, when Bonnie Henry was working night and day
No,
to
he's
keep
not
us
using
safe
that, is he?
So-
during the pandemic, you know, John Rustad
What has
and
this
his
got to do with
candidates
anything?
were
This is
providing
great.
donations to people who were protesting outside of hospitals, anti-vax convoy members. He's
Oh,
still an anti-vaxxer. He appeared in front of a group of people that called the so-called, you called it the
That is just not
so-called
true.
COVID vaccine. You said you wish you'd never been
That's just
vaccinated.
you guys
And then
called
when
it the
someone said, do you
so-called freedom
think
protest.
that public health
Freedom
professionals
convoy.
should be tried like Nazi
Honestly,
war
look
at him.
criminals?
Oh
She
my
said,
God,
"Well,
I knew it. I knew
we said that
Nazi.
we would support
Use the
anyone who
N-word.
do
So
that,
look,
John.
I'll keep
It's
pause.
embarrassing. You know, I wouldn't
Pause.
fight.
Okay,
My
Godwin's
hands
rule.
are shaking.
Can
Because
we
we-
say Godwin's rule? That's
Because I'm about to go insane in a second here with all this.
we
stuff
all know what
going on.
Godwin's rule is, though, right? The Godwin's rule is the first person to bring up anything to do with Nazis or Hitler is the loser of the debate.
Like, obviously there are some people who've been watching the debate who are obviously like watching it live who are like well past us right now, but
Yeah.
like, man, the thing is that I hope John by the end of the debate just turns to him and says, like, David, you've been so rude this entire time to both me and Sonia. Can you show the least amount of respect for us to like, as like, or whatever he has to say something along the lines of, which is like, which demonstrates how little respect you have for the voters in BC, that you're just trying to get up here and bully us. That's what he should respond to, that you've just been rude this entire time and now you're trying to use far left press prog a smear tactic against me, someone cutting me out of context and pretending I said something I didn't. That's what I was just saying.
David Eby did not address, there's a story about a senior who used up all his life savings and now he's living in a hospital emergency room. So David, you're in power right now. So why don't you tell us what you're going to do about that? First of all, a lot of seniors died in the care homes because of the you-know-what. And then now he pivoted. He pivoted to the vaccines. And now he's on the vaccine track. I think that was one of his tactics. It's like, if I'm nosediving here, I'm going to vaccine. I'm going to talk about the vaccine. Oh, he supported protesters outside a hospital, which Global covered badly because I was working there at the time, and we covered that poorly on purpose. Anyway, go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's get back to it.
Yeah.
Fire Bonnie Henry. I'm trying to hire you and your family.
Yeah,
family
fire Bonnie
doctor.
Henry,
We've connected 250,000 people to family doctors. We've got so much more to do. But if you think that we'll be safer in our province with someone who doesn't believe that vaccines are in charge of things,
Thank you very much, Sachi. The reality is I'm triple vaccinated. The reality is in British Columbia, I also promoted and supported people getting vaccinated, especially for seniors.
I'm also triple
especially
regretful.
for seniors in our communities. I was supportive of that. However, I am not anti-vax. I am anti-mandate.
Yeah.
I believe that people should have choice. It shouldn't be thrust upon them and forced upon them or coerced to be able to take a vaccine.
You never know which John Rustad's going to show up.
Sure.
Okay,
When he's talking to supporters,
Mr.
he
Eby,
says,
I always know
this
his
person
name.
vaccine tonight, now he's talking
I'll
about
explain that to you if you like.
You never know. You never
I
know
don't
who you're gonna
expect that
talk
these
to.
two are door knocking, but I am. And
When
I'm
I
talking to a lot
turns
of
his
seniors
back
in
on the
Victoria.
that's
And what I hear from
weird.
seniors are the concerns that they have around
That is so
losing their
awesome.
affordable housing. That is the number
What
one concern I've
affordable
heard from seniors. And then I hear from seniors who don't have access to primary care. And what these two are not focused on is protecting that affordable housing, protecting that right to live and age in place that seniors want to have after having contributed to our society, paid their taxes their whole life. They want a government that is going to have their back. And that's not what they feel right now. And then they want to make sure that they do have primary care. And what has not happened under the NDP is the solutions to the primary care crisis. UPCCs are twice as expensive as meeting a family doctor, and they do not work to solve this crisis. There's one really important factor. They'll keep talking about, we're going to get more doctors, we're going to train more doctors. BC has more family doctors per capita than the rest of the country. They're just not willing to work in this broken system. We want to make a primary public healthcare system that doctors want to work in, that healthcare professionals want to work in, and that will serve the people of BC.
There's a great desire for both these leaders to come back in.
It's clear in my mind that keeping seniors at home as best we can and support them is the right thing to do. In 2022, I lost my father, I lost my father-in-law, and I lost my mother in that year. But we were able to keep them in their home right to the end because we were able to support with family. There was not the level of care, unfortunately, for many, many seniors that are out there to be able to do that. And we know that when seniors can stay in their home, their quality of life is much better. And for me, we were able to provide that quality of life for my parents. But I know many families can't. And that's where we need to be able to make sure we're supporting those families to be able to stay in their homes.
Okay, I'm going to allow you to come back in, Mr. Eby, and I'll give you a little bit more time.
Thanks. These are huge challenges that we face in our healthcare system. You know, when John Rustad was in government in 2010, they said, we're going to make sure everyone gets a GP. A GP for me, the program, they called it. 5 years later, fewer people had a family doctor than when the program started. We're actually making progress on getting people family doctors. David? We're supporting you and your family. And we believe in the science of things like vaccines. We don't have a candidate that says that vaccines give you AIDS. We don't support anti-vax convoy members. We believe that science works and it keeps us safe with things like vaccinations.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eby. We're now moving on to our next section, which is the opioid crisis and public safety. It has been the better part of a decade since BC.
Okay, so what, Eby comes out as not in favor of liberty? He just doesn't like the idea of liberty? That's
Can I make something perfectly clear? Nobody is in favor of Nazi convoys in Canada. Like, absolutely no one. I don't know where this came from.
That's always what I always think whenever people are like, the Conservatives said they were going to cut healthcare. Who's ever run on cutting healthcare ever? Who's running on that? Like, it's like, did you know that they're running on killing cats and dogs and stuffing them in wood chippers? Oh, really? Oh, wow. They announced that? Oh, They're probably thinking they're going to win tons of votes. Whenever it's like the left are like such conspiracy theorists. At the start of any election, they're running on pushing your grandmother down the stairs. What? Like, it's always like they're going to cut roads. They're going to they're going to cut funding to schools. Like, no, who's saying these things?
Yeah. Should we? Yeah. Now they're going to talk about the opioid crisis. What does David have to say about that? This is all under his watch.
Before we get into that, Angela Cordoso with a $5 super chat says, it seems like the question to Rustad is trying to set him up for a gotcha type answer. Am I reading the same one again? Sorry. Yeah. I have no words to describe what I think of Eby, only that I have not have any nice ones, not nice to share publicly. Yeah. Well, you and me both. Let's get for you, Angela. Yeah, exactly.
He first declared a public health emergency over drug-related deaths. Since then, more than 15,000 people have died, and on average, between 6 and 7 people die every day. My first question is to Ms. Firstenow. Ms. Firstenow, you plan to continue safe supply. You talk about prevention and reducing stigma. But how do you tell people, especially young people, about the risks of using hard drugs while simultaneously trying to destigmatize?
Yeah, it's really important that young people get good information, they get reliable information. We've seen in programs in the United States, in middle schools and high schools, where when young people get the information that gives them everything they need to know about the risks and dangers, especially of opioids and hard drugs, there's a 66% decline in use of amongst young people. That's what we should be aiming for. The other thing that young people need, and I had a friend of mine who's 18 reading me some statistics this afternoon saying that girls are saying that their mental health is worse than it's ever been. We need counselors in schools. We need enough EAs in schools. Kids need to feel supported in their schools. Prevention is critical. But it's interesting that David Eby says he listens to Bonnie Henry when it comes to COVID and when it comes to that public health emergency. But he rejects her advice when it comes to this public health emergency that has claimed 15,000 people's lives. There needs to be a regulated pharmaceutical alternative to the toxic drugs that are being distributed by organized crime in our streets. And that's the advice from the provincial health officer to this government.
Okay, that's time. Thank you, Ms. Firstenow. To you, Mr. Rustad. As you know, homelessness and addiction often go hand in hand. You say you'll clear tent encampments. You say you won't hesitate to close overdose prevention sites. Instead, you're focusing on drug-free housing, which currently does not exist at the scale you would need. Won't your policies simply drive more vulnerable people into the streets?
There's no question when you look at this crisis of overdoses and drug addictions in British Columbia, it is horrendous what is happening here. Last year, just over 5,700 people died in Canada. Close to half of those were in British Columbia, 2,500 people in British Columbia alone. Clearly what that means is the policies in this province are not working. If you look at any other province by any other measure, they are performing better than we are in British Columbia. So we need to take a different approach. We need to make sure that we bring an end to decriminalization and safe supply. We need to bring an end to this, to the government being a drug dealer, quite frankly. What we need to do in British Columbia is build out recovery. And yes, you're right, there is significant investment that's needed, and we're going to make those investments. Everything from doctor-prescribed treatment to short-term recovery, to longer-term recovery, and to involuntary, compassionate recovery. These are things that need to be done. We're going to build out this capacity. But I'll tell you the story of Christian, who was a 13-year-old, and when he was first addicted and not told by his parents did everything they possibly could to try to get help for him. He eventually passed away when he was 28. And when I talked to the mom said, I asked the government to try to help me and they refused. They didn't even answer the phone.
That's time. Okay, Mr. Eby, thank you. I am going to come back around and invite you to answer the substance of the question. We've heard you on the things that need to be done. Heard that. However, as we pointed out in the question, the capacity that you're talking about does not meet the scale at this time. In closing tent encampments, in closing safe consumption sites and other use sites, Are you not driving drug addicted people back into the streets? Where exactly do you expect them to go? I will give you 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you. We need to make sure that there's three distinct groups. There's those that are down on their luck. There's those that have addictions and those that have mental health. We need to make sure that we have housing and available for those people that need it and down on their luck. When we have people with addiction, we need to make sure that we deal with detox, get them into a place where we can put them in housing for recovery and make sure we have that. It needs to be built out. And of course, with mental health, we have to make sure those supports are there. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that in the future.
What was that
Okay,
interjection from the moderator?
In the 7
Like
years
saying,
government has been in power. People
plan
around
isn't
British
perfect.
Columbia have seen
Why
their
isn't it
communities-
perfect?
Yeah.
Like, what she was saying is like, there's not the housing available for your plan. I'm like, well, yeah, I haven't been in government building stuff. Like, what is this nonsense where it's like, technically your plan wouldn't start immediately working perfectly on day one? Like,
No.
okay, what's the point of this interjection here? That's
Yeah.
like anyone coming out and saying, your housing plan isn't going to make 100,000 new units available tomorrow. Why is that?
Right,
I
exactly.
don't
She's
know
not
what to tell
wrong.
you, lady. Like,
She's not wrong. There's not enough houses in the world for all the junkies in BC.
and
They don't
you're
wanna
right,
live in
there's
housing
actually currently not
sometimes.
enough units, but that's kind of part of the plan to build the units.
But I thought
Yeah.
in 30 seconds, John Rustad broke that answer down very well. Very,
Yeah,
very
it
well.
was really good.
It was
And
good.
honestly, Eby does not have a lot of room to
What leg
take a
does he
unique
have to
position.
stand on this drug issue with the vending machines that they now, I think, have since removed, and all the opiates they're giving. So anyway,
And he's been so rude, he can't afford to agree with anything John said, despite how common sense it is. Because if he does, people are going to be like, oh, so he's not an anti-vax Nazi monster?
yeah.
Here we go. Let's see what it says.
Scarred by the toxic drug and mental health crises. Tent cities and street crime have become common. How do you respond to those who say your policies, including the experiment to decriminalize public drug consumption, have only made things worse?
Yeah, this is a really awful crisis. I listened to the story of Christian and the struggle of his parents to get him support. Anyone who's lost a child or a parent or a loved one or a friend, and there are so many people, there are very few people who haven't been directly affected by this, knows the scale of the human tragedy and that it's urgent. And it's led us to try things that were unimaginable at certain points. Who would have imagined that there would be
even don't work.
an all-party committee and the police chiefs lining up say, let's try decriminalization. Let's try removing stigma so that people can come forward and ask for help. They don't worry about getting arrested or losing their job. And so we tried it. And it didn't produce
Dude, it
the
was just the
results
police
that anybody
chiefs that
wanted.
we appointed who
Instead of
we knew
people
were very
feeling like they
left-wing
could
and
come
woke.
forward, people struggling with brain injuries, mental health issues, and addictions felt like they could use drugs anywhere in the province.
Is this some cop
So
out?
we had to
Not my
change
fault,
course.
so
It's a
we're
hard
doing other
problem.
things?
Won't be solved with simple slogans. We got to do that.
Like Stalin coming
We
out and
actually
blaming
need
his
to
like
take
other
on this
advisors.
problem head on. We have opened hundreds of new treatment beds. We're providing support for youth like Christian, Vancouver Island, the Orca-Lalem site. We've got so much more to do. And we'll do everything it takes to make sure that we're supporting people in recovery however we can.
Until the election's
Thank you,
over.
Mr. Eby. Same question to all of you. Throughout this campaign, you've been largely focused on what to do once toxic drugs are already in our communities. To each of you, what is your plan to address the role of organized crime and the constant flow of drugs through our ports and other places? We begin with Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby, finally Ms. Furstenau.
Thank you. There's no question in my mind that our ports are wide open. The German report has said that less than 1% of containers in the British Columbia are actually checked. The federal government exited the scene in 1997, and the problem has only gotten worse under David Eby. And I suggested, and I still move forward, the plan that we are going to strengthen our port police. We're going to actually make sure that that force is there and available to be able to do that work. David Eby said, oh, you can't do that. It's federal. Watch us. We're going to make sure that we crack down on these ports. We're going to bring an end to the organized crime, the drugs and the guns that are coming through our ports. We're going to help work with the federal government to strengthen our borders right around. We're going to do everything we
He
can.
mentioned the illegal guns right there. So if Eby tries to pivot on the gun thing,
so that we can get these dangerous drugs off our streets. They're killing people on a regular basis. This needs to happen, and a conservative government's going to make sure that we put the resources there to end our ports being wide open and to bring an end to this crisis.
Mr. Eby.
Thanks, Chachi. Again, difficult to listen to John Rustad on this critically important issue of organized crime in our province. When John was in government, Gangsters brought hockey
You're in
bags
government.
full of unmarked bills to BC casinos. They laundered money with impunity. They used our court system to enforce those same gambling debts.
That never happens.
Government had no interest in taking that on. And now John Rustad has actually announced that he's not even going to enforce federal gun laws in British Columbia. He's going to direct the police, and this isn't just one time or twice, it's 3 times, including in the radio debate we participated in. He will direct the police not to enforce federal gun laws that prevent abusers from accessing guns, that prevent gangsters from buying and selling handguns and semi-automatic weapons. It's ridiculous. And now he says he's going to get tough on crime. Give me a break. John, you have to go with the gangsters. You have to take their cars and their houses and their guns and enforce the law, and that's what we're going to do.
Under my watch, money laundering has come to a screeching halt.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems we have is that
now we give
people are
government
being
escorts to
abandoned
criminals so that they
to
get in and out of the justice
homelessness.
system as fast as possible.
So I debunked that whole narrative last week as well, and even the CCFR covered they clipped a piece of my show to put on their Twitter of me debunking that, saying
they clipped my show recently too.
What they're saying that John Rustad's going to do is already illegal in British Columbia. All they got to do is use the laws that are on the books. What John Rustad is objecting to is that the government come in and confiscate legally acquired firearms from legally owning.
He's literally saying, I want police doing their actual jobs, going after gangs carrying illegal weapons smuggled over the borders or through ports like John Rustad, like he just mentioned. Not like going down and just like raiding a farmer's property because he might have the exact specific wrong type of shotgun.
But it makes me think, like, is anything that John's saying actually bad when all he can do is lie about his perspective? Like, that's it's an outright lie. It was fabricated.
I just don't understand
solutions for them.
In your day, Mr. Rustad, there was money laundering everywhere.
Right.
It's like
it's massive right now.
It's like a Team America parody. Like, now people run around with rainbows and hand out candy to kids because we've banned crime. I've been down to East Hastings. People are running around with gumdrop smiles and are injecting sugar water into people's arms to give them a little bit of that jolt in the morning. Like, what is this?
Oh boy!
Yeah, it's a bizarre world.
Mayors are asking the provincial government, have been asking the provincial government to step up and play the role that they're supposed to play, to have a social safety net, to ensure that people aren't living outside and gathered in an area where it's very easy for organized crime to find them and to sell them substances that are very dangerous and often deadly. We have an example in Duncan. 4 years it's been operating. It's been a proven success model. It's the village site. It gets people into homes. It gets them wraparound services. It gets them connection, belonging, community, employment, and it keeps them away from organized crime. This is what should be scaled up everywhere in this province. This is how we solve this crisis.
Thank you. And now time for open debate. Mr. Eby, we'll start with you.
Thanks. I think it's critically important on an issue as challenging as the toxic drug crisis to be frank with British Columbians. We're going to have to try different things. We're going to have to do different things to get at this and provide people the support that they need. And it's not okay to play politics with it, John. It's not okay to say to one community when you're in Richmond, to the Chinese community, we're going to close the overdose prevention sites. We're going to close the drug dens.
He literally just said he wants to close the.
And then later on, you say, well, actually, we're not going to close them. We're just going to change the name. And then your critic, Eleanor Sturko, comes out and she says, well, actually, we're going to expand them. We're going to put additional service. People need to know what the plan is. These are hard issues. Lives are on the line. This is not a simple fix. It's not solved with a tweet, and it's sure not solved by pretending to one community.
We keep hearing about parents.
This first to know, then Mr.
From both John and David,
even addressing
as an MLA, from parents who say exactly what we're hearing. I needed to get help for my child. My child needed mental health support. My child was in crisis. I couldn't find anything. There's one child psychiatrist in all of Cowichan. We are not creating a voluntary care system. We are not creating a mental health care system that meets people's needs before they're in crisis. And we don't have a plan from either of these two leaders to ensure that people have access to psychologists under MSP, which is something we've been pushing for 3 years, that people have access to child psychologists, that kids know that the counselors are there for them, so that we are avoiding these terrible crises that kids are finding themselves in, and parents saying, I can't find help for my child.
In British Columbia, David Eby has had 7 years. And what has the results been? We have seen, for example, in Surrey, where people are being blackmailed and threatened on a regular basis. We're seeing gangs and gang activity happening at an extraordinary level, people being killed by these gangs.
John,
we have not seen any action that has actually taken anything. And David Eby, we have seen in some of these safe supply locations, we have actually seen people arrested and distributing drugs in those facilities. These sort of things need to be shut down when that happens. We have to have a zero tolerance policy for this type of an approach in British Columbia. He has done nothing. He has not even addressed the facilities where there was a problem like that. And the police had to go in and seize the drugs and arrest people.
British Columbians need to know where you stand on these issues. When you go and you call them drug dens and you say, I'm going to close all the overdose prevention sites to one community, and then you go to another community and you say something, when you're talking to a guy whose life was saved 5 times, let me finish, John, this is important. When you're talking to a guy whose life was saved 5 times at an overdose prevention site, and you tell him, actually, don't worry, we're not going to close them, we're just going to change the name. That kind of disingenuous politics is exactly what we don't need in the toxic drug crisis.
What we need to be doing here is where you have somebody...
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. Disingenuous politics is saying that a guy's life got saved 5 times. If you saved him 5 times, you didn't save him once. He's still doing it. So, like, you're not helping at all if you got to keep saving the guy's life. If he's not off the drugs, you haven't saved him once.
And
I just had to throw that in there.
Rustin's been pretty consistent on this overall, that when he said, you're saying different things at different times, I'm like, yeah, but he's usually addressing different things. He wants to shut down the hydromorphone safe supply distribution centers. He wants to shut down the places where all they do is let you inject drugs and walk out like Insight. That's not helping anyone. That's not where they're saving people. There are actual places, there are rehab sites where technically I think at the moment you can use drugs, but they actually have nurses and doctors available. And the whole point is to help people. The thing is that he wants to shut down the 2 of those that are absolutely bad. And then the one that kind of doing good work, they can modify over time into a rehab system. That's literally what he's saying, but Eby's trying to pretend that Rustin's been inconsistent because he's saying 3 different things at the same time. Like, no, he's saying 3 different things in regards to 3 different scenarios.
Yeah,
that's how things work.
And it's brought back to life. Clearly, they are not making the right decisions for themselves. We need, as a government, to be able to be compassionate about it and get them into treatment, get them into involuntary treatment, so that they can be able to recover.
Systems that should have prevented these crises. These 2 want to focus on the worst place that people can be in crisis: homeless, in despair, using substances that are so dangerous. What they don't want to focus on are the lack of investments under the BC Liberals, the cutting back of services that got us here. And they don't want to focus on the fact that for the last 7 years, the NDP have not responded to this crisis in a way that actually averts it. I want us to have a war on poverty. I want us to address the social conditions that are creating these outcomes. I want us to make sure that in BC, we don't have Lamborghinis driving down a road where people are living on the streets. These are solvable problems. We just haven't had the political will to either prevent them or solve them from either of these 2 parties.
Sonia's right. We do need to support people to make sure that they don't go down this path as much as possible. It's part of our commitment and the work we're doing in our education system to expand access to educational assistants and counselors in every single school. They intervene early.
We know that if school is not going to cut it. 1 counselor per school is not. I've been in schools. When you have a population of 1,500 kids in one school, 1 counselor is not enough. We need counselors there for kids when they need them.
Yeah. Leaders, I do have to keep us to time, and that is time for this section. Our next theme deals with Indigenous rights and land use. Earlier this year, the province paused amendments to the Land Act, which would have shared decision-making powers with First Nations. The first question is to you, Mr. Eby. Your proposed Land Act changes have faced criticism over impacts on individual land rights, treaty negotiations, and major resource developments, including those supported by First Nations. If you win this election, will you again attempt to amend the Land Act?
No, we won't, Sonia.
It's just a really muddled
And
question.
the reason is that we need to make sure that we have the confidence of British Columbians in doing this critically important work. We can't spend a bunch of money on lawyers fighting Indigenous people in court all the way through to the Supreme Court of Canada and back and forth. We're not ending up any further ahead. It brings uncertainty, it brings a loss of investment, and it brings a lack of improvement in conditions for First Nations people in the province. We've got to work in partnership. I'm very frank about that, because I know that when we work with Indigenous people, we lift the conditions for Indigenous people across the province in BC, but we also improve the lives of the regions around them. And so when I think about mining, for example, in the Northwest, the Tahltan, major mine under construction right now, 1,800 jobs. It's a cooperative partnership between the Tahltan and the mining company. It's the future in the province, not fighting in court. And what John Rustad is doing, spreading division. Some of the candidates openly racist to Indigenous people.
Oh my God.
Denying the history of residential schools. Paul Rashford in my own constituency on Orange Shirt Day saying he won't wear an orange shirt because he won't misrepresent Canadian history. These kind of candidates he's running. We don't need division. We need to work together.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eby. To Mr. Rustad, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act was passed by all parties 5 years ago. You say you may repeal it. Is that for certain? Be specific. Under what conditions would you do so?
Thank you, Sachi. When we look at British Columbia and we look at First Nations in British Columbia, they've been held back economically for far too long. We need to be able to unleash their potential. We need to make sure that they can fully participate in the economy. We make sure that economic reconciliation can be a reality. And I've witnessed this firsthand as I signed 435 agreements with First Nations. I witnessed this firsthand when I see the difference it makes to people on the ground and to what's going on in our province. And so my perspective on this, and our Conservative Party looks at British Columbia, working with First Nations, lifting them up, making sure that we can help fulfill those opportunities for them. And when there is legislation in place that creates friction between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, I think that's wrong. That is not reconciliation. So we need to be able to move beyond that. When you look at the debate in the UN on the United Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, we want to bring that to life in terms of how we work with First Nations. You look at the debate, you look at the intention, that's how we will utilize UNDRIP in British Columbia. DRIPper legislation, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People Act, has caused friction in this province, and it needs to be replaced with what makes sense so that we are not creating the divisions amongst people, but instead we're making sure that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous life have the opportunity to be able to fully participate and benefit from a growing and expanding economy.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. To Ms. Firstenow, your platform says Indigenous governments have decision-making authority over their lands. But how do you reconcile this when economically independent First Nations who want to log old growth forests, or they want to support pipeline projects?
Yeah, well, for so long in this province, these are the only options that have been given to First Nations. And the kind of economic reconciliation that John Rustad is talking about are the benefits agreements that he entered into with First Nations that were colonial and paternalistic, that identified how the money could be spent if those proceeds went to First Nations, that ensured that First Nations couldn't criticize a project, that ensured that the people of those nations couldn't speak out. What we need is to recognize that the courts have been telling governments across Canada, and especially here in BC, that rights and title for First Nations exist, and the courts have been directing governments to do the work to sort that out at a negotiating table, not, as David said, spend millions and tens of millions of dollars on legal fees, fighting battles that the provincial government always loses, because the courts have been consistent on this, and the courts want governments to create certainty, to create consistency, and to ensure that we're doing the hard but essential work of reconciliation with First Nations.
Thank you, Ms. Firstino. And now the same question to all of you, beginning with Mr. Eby. Time and again, the courts have ruled in favor of Aboriginal titles. So when you, as Premier, are in a situation where you are negotiating over what to do with Crown land, which is considered public land, whose interests are you prioritizing?
Well, that's a critically important question, Shachi. Thank you. And the best way I can describe it to you is to talk to you about the agreement we did with the Haida people. You know, recognizing Haida title, everybody knew the government wasn't going to win in court. Haida have been there since time immemorial. They've got their own governance. They've been looking after different functions. And so when we entered into an agreement with the Haida, it was to make sure that we were sitting down as partners at a table with shared responsibility. We're going to work it out. We're not going to go to court. And that's what we did. That's how we got to an agreement with the Haida. And, you know, when we went to the legislature, John Rustad stood up, he looked in the eyes of the Haida elders, and he said, yes, this is the right thing to do. I went and I talked to the Attorney General. We never were going to win a court. But then as soon as he got outside the legislature, he hit social media, he said, hey, the Haida are coming for your private property. A total lie, a total fiction, and an example of the kind of divisive politics that our province does not need.
Ms. Firstino.
Well, it's really critical that we create certainty in this province, that it's long-term, and that we recognize, again, what the courts have indicated for us to do and what government should be doing. To politicize this the way that the Conservatives did, and to really not do the work properly, because the NDP did not work with the people of BC, did not demonstrate that. But when you ask whose interests on Crown land are being protected, for so long in this province, Crown land has been handed over for resource extraction by industries, and they have extracted enormous wealth. They have extracted our resources. They have come in and done boom and bust economics over and over again. And whose interests were not protected were the long-term interests of British Columbians. We now have a devastated landscape. We have so much damage that has come, and the wealth has left our province.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. When you see economic reconciliation on BC, you see both Indigenous and non-Indigenous be able to prosper. And I'll give you the Haida, for example. They went from 65% unemployment to 15% unemployment. There's so many nations that have engaged economically that have been able to change lives and make that difference for people. And I think, quite frankly, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike want to see that happen on the landscape. I have gone out and I've talked and all the agreements that I've done and seen the difference it makes. And when it comes to Haida, or to the Haida Gwaii and the Haida people, I fully support addressing title. It needed to happen. It's the right thing to do. But private land and infrastructure should never have been put on the table. Not without engaging with the people and making sure that you're in a situation. By coming forward and doing it, ultimately you're going to end up with Indigenous law applying to your private property. We need to make sure that everybody's at the table if you want to achieve true reconciliation.
Okay, time now for open debate. Ms. Firstino, we begin with you. Mr. Eby, I see you shaking your head. You may engage once you've had a moment to speak.
Look, it's fascinating to me that John Rustad's vision for this province is one that's rooted somewhere around 1957. I mean, he cannot look ahead because he can only look back. He is so limited in his imagination.
Your ideas are truncated. I mean, this
when
is
it comes to
tired.
reconciliation,
I'm
when it
over
comes to
this.
sorting
Ideas
out
are literally
rights and
let's
title,
not engage
what
in
we
resource
have to do, the
extraction.
hard but essential work we have to do, all John Rustad can do is look back to when he was Minister of
Why is she
Indigenous
insulting him
Relations.
so much?
And what he wanted to do was visit
This
First
is the
Nations that
typical
had
Green
golf
Party
courses.
or
He is
federal
not
NDP
seriously
type leader,
taking
like
this
party
issue
that will never
and
win.
recognizing
Sanctimonious.
the serious work
You're right,
of
like,
a
she's
provincial
never gonna
government
take away
is
votes.
not to politicize this,
Podium.
not to make people afraid, but to
She's
recognize
lucky she's
that
sitting at
to
the
move
table.
forward, to create economic certainty, to create economic prosperity for everybody in BC, this issue has to be sorted
Oh
out.
my god, this is like the speech you have to
Look,
listen
I mean,
to
look at what the
from a
Squamish
vendor
Nation
at
are
a
doing at the
farmer's
foot of the
market
Broad
you're
Street
trying to buy
Bridge.
tomatoes from.
You know, this was a reserve property that
She's
was
like,
stolen
"Okay,
from
lady,
them by the government. The
can I have
Squamish
my
were
bag
kicked
now?"
off, and that
Squamish
property
were
sat
kicked off.
vacant for many years. It was given back by the federal government. What they did was they're building hundreds and hundreds of units of rental housing for the whole community. We all benefit from that. This work actually improves and increases prosperity for everyone. And John wants to say it wants to take something away from you. It wants to take your private property away from you. Nothing could be further from the truth. So there were private property owners from Haida Gwaii, business owners who came to support that because the certainty, knowing the path forward, makes their businesses and their communities more valuable, more prosperous.
Mr. Rusto,
First Nations people are not coming for your backyard.
Thank you. What we need to see in this province is an opportunity for everybody to be able to prosper. There's no question there. That's one of the reasons why, as part of economic reconciliation, we are actually going to look at the strategic the return of land to First Nations people. It needs to happen. This is rights and title. Right, title is included. It's Section 35 of our Constitution. So we will be engaging with First Nations, but we want to make sure that what we're doing with First Nations is creating those opportunities for success. I have seen it when I have a young lady that comes to me and says, I'd like to give you a meat offering. And I say, what for? Because you put a program in place that gave me some training. I got my first job. I was living on the street as a single mom. I had my child on the street. I couldn't look after my child. Now I have a job. I'm back doing some training. I have another job. And I just want to say thank you. That is what economic reconciliation is, connecting with people, making sure they have an opportunity to build a future and look after the kids. That's what any parent would want in the province. That's what we need to deliver when we're working with First Nations in BC.
Well, I don't know if I would compare a relationship
with
First Nations to parent and child.
The faces in his posture.
As a partnership, as a true partnership. We're working together to build a province here. And when we work together, amazing things happen. You know, some of the most successful projects in this province are joint projects with Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, and it improves life in the whole community. John, I just can't
that was written all over our Shaw and Chorus material. Together is amazing.
A law that just recognizes the rights that we know Indigenous people have in this province. Why would you pick a fight with Indigenous people as one of your first steps? We got to work together.
Because John just wants to take us back to the 20th century. It's where he feels most comfortable. It's where he feels
he's got, right?
He cannot see a future that's different from the one in the past that he's had.
What a gang
and he cannot see a future that's
I really admire this guy, John, putting up with this bullshit.
Like Sonia Firstino is a second away from telling us that I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood. People really like their lawns. And she's not even the one being like asking so bad.
Like, how truncated are her ideas? They came from middle of Germany, right around the time of Karl Marx. Yeah,
the lady actually, she's not even Karl Marx. She's like Pol Pot. She believes that we need to go back to year zero and that industrialization is bad and we all need to go to the killing field so that she can, like, I don't know, fertilize the land with our bodies or something. Like, I'm obviously being hyperbolic and silly here. But, like, she actually doesn't want industrialization. She doesn't want logging. She doesn't want oil and gas. She's like, we've tried the boom and bust economy. Oh, okay, so let's just try busting forever, never actually having money. She's the type of person that you look into her eyes and she says, we need to invest more in the education industry. That's not an industry. That's a thrill that you get because you actually have real productivity in taking things out of the ground, building things, or like services, like other services. There's no such thing as an education industry. That's not an industry.
It's not. I really feel bad for John putting up with this.
Business is not what it used to be.
Yeah.
Like, how much? I'm wondering how much left is in this. Health. Do you think 20 more minutes? I wonder how long they have to go.
Oh,
who knows, right? Yeah.
What the BC Liberals created when he was a cabinet minister in their government. This is a man who lacks imagination, who lacks the capacity to see a better future.
The first thing we'll do as a Conservative government, should we have that honor and the trust of people in this province, is actually to get rid of a lot of the waste and excess that this government is spending money on. They have expanded the budget by 70% and delivered nothing. 7 years and nothing has improved. We need to change course and make sure that we put people first in BC.
Okay, we do have to leave it there and move on to our next theme, which is about the future of British Columbia. The first question to you, Ms. Firstenow. We're living with the effects of climate change every day. Fires, floods, and this summer, no BC grown peaches. At the same time, the reality remains this province relies on resource-based industries. Between 2017 and 2020, your party held up an NDP government. Tell us
chatter
What
about
did
this
the
than
BC
people
Greens
overdosing.
actually do to transition BC's fiscal future away from fossil fuels?
Yeah, we did have a confidence in supply agreement with the BC NDP, and when they brought forward a piece of legislation to give LNG Canada at that time over $6 billion in subsidies, we voted against it. But who voted with them? The BC Liberals. This is where John and David
Who
are
are not
aligned.
on stage.
They're aligned on subsidizing fossil fuels. They're aligned on building more LNG infrastructure in BC. They're aligned on continuing to drag us back to a fossil fuel age when the rest of the world is moving forward, when we will not be able to meet our emissions. And it's interesting that David's been asking about which John Rustad. Before he became premier, David Eby said, we cannot meet our climate targets and continue to build any more fossil fuel infrastructure. But under the NDP, we've gone from 0 LNG facilities to a potential of 7. We have a government that is all in on a fuel that is now proven to be worse than coal, that the International Energy Agency has said will leave BC behind because the demand will be gone. We need a clean energy future for BC, and the only party focused on that truly are the BC Greens.
Thank you, Ms.
Wow, she sounds like she works for the office of John Horgan. What are you talking about? Coal is not worse. LNG is not worse than coal. What are you-
LNG pushed my grandmother down the stairs.
Yeah, what is that? The only reason why the NDP were against the LNG was because John Horgan's crony buddies were in the coal industry. They were shutting down the sale of natural gas overseas so that they could have the sale of coal overseas and have a full market on that.
Man, if I got to be there.
Isn't Vancouver the largest coal exporting port in the world or something?
Huge.
It literally is, yeah.
Vancouver, yes, it's massive.
Here's the thing too, like I would love to be there because I just like turn to her after this and be like, is this like a bit or something? Like, did you just show up for like, is this
some
like
kind of Andy Kaufman act?
Yeah, like if you get paid by someone to show up here and just see if you can say the dumbest possible things and like nobody's gonna laugh. Like this is like what is the
nobody's gonna laugh at her, not in that room.
I read a study.
This is why they don't have live audiences anymore for these.
Yeah,
Well,
they should though.
They should add a laugh track.
LNG caused 9/11. Elizabeth.
Let's get back to it.
Ms. First, now to you, Mr. Rustad. You've promised a lot of changes that aren't actually under BC jurisdiction. Repealing taxes on tips is federal law. The courts have ruled you can't just clear away homeless camps, and you say you'll bring back those plastic straws. Are you promising things that a BC government alone can't actually deliver?
So we're very proud of the fact that we just need to get rid of the stuff that sucks in BC. Paper straws. I'm sorry, we've got to get rid of those. It doesn't work for people in BC. You know, there's a little meme I saw where there was 2 lines of white powder, supposedly cocaine, and a plastic straw, and the bottom sign said, one of these is illegal in BC. And that to me tells a great story in terms of David Eby's British Columbia. When we look at tips and what has happened in British Columbia, of course we can't impact what's going on the federal side, but we can categorize it and make sure that it's not taxed from a provincial side. And it's easy enough to be able to do that in terms of computer technology today to do it. It's the right thing to do for people who are serving, people who need that extra little boost to make sure we have that sort of money available. These are the types of initiatives we need to do to be able to help people in British Columbia, not to put barriers and struggles in front of people in British Columbia. So we're actually very aggressive in everything that we need to do in this province because things aren't working. It's been 7 years, Mr. Eby, and he has not been able to deliver for people in BC. We need change, and that common sense change is what the Conservatives will deliver for BC.
Get rid of the suck.
Mr. Eby, you've spent a lot of time in this campaign, a significant part of your platform talking about John Rustad. Are you more focused on him than your own plans for the next 4 years?
Thanks,
Yes,
Shasti.
you are.
Not at all. But it's important that British Columbians know who's running in the election and what their positions are. John Rustad, he's avoiding debates. He refused to debate on the island. He won't take follow-up questions from reporters. He doesn't get back.
Shut up.
This is
media outlets when he asks questions
He's
that
right
he
next
doesn't
to you,
like.
buddy.
Answering questions is not optional.
Yeah.
If you're applying for the top job in British Columbia, and you got to answer the questions.
Won't take follow-up.
And when you're
That's a bunch of
climate
bull,
change
Eby.
denier, when you say that the science behind climate change, the same science that's predicting this massive hurricane off the coast of Florida,
That's because
No.
whatever
Is
happens,
false.
they just say that climate change
that it's
predicted it.
a hoax
Yeah.
and a lie, and people have been tricked. How do you lead a province whose massive advantage is clean electricity? Some of the lowest carbon products available. Sonia says no fossil fuel development at all.
Like
I say-
hydroelectric dams.
If it's net zero by 2030,
We have a lot
lifting
of
up
those.
Indigenous people like Chief Smith and the Heisla,
There should be net zero
then we can do it.
Net
John
zero
says, let her
stupid.
rip. We got to be better than that. This isn't about plastic straws. That's the least we can do to tell our kids that we're moving in the right direction. Developing our electricity and hydrogen, it's the path forward.
Okay, thank you. Same question to all of you,
Oh,
beginning
he's so
with Mr.
picky.
Rustad. You all know the financial situation
think
the province is
anybody-
in. Each of you
I don't think anybody is showing paper straws to their kids and presenting
Going, this is
that
what
as
you
an-
need to do. Yeah.
Also, by the way,
presenting that as an example of how we've evolved as a society.
I've had to explain this to people. Do they realize that it takes more energy to make a paper straw than a plastic straw? Like multiple times. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
I mentioned this on one of our spaces. If you're going to get rid of plastic straws, just get rid of straws altogether. The only
Yeah.
people that need straws are people without hands.
So I went to Wendy's the other day, and
Jordan Drugs.
they went that route. They've gotten rid of straws altogether because
Yeah.
obviously people don't like them. So they just have like a little sippy thing. But the sippy cups don't work with ice. It's the worst.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, have you noticed that in Canada, because it was easier and cheaper to do, we switched from paper money to plastic money. But
Yeah.
for some reason, now it's better to go the opposite direction and go from plastic straws to paper straws, even though the logic for the money was that it takes less energy to make the plastic money.
So I'm
Yeah.
having a hard time with the argumentation here. So they're saying this is a federal law. It's not a federal law to ban straws in Canada. There are other places in Canada that haven't banned straws. The federal ban on straws was deemed unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And they're challenging that in court now. The law in BC is a British Columbia law. He can repeal it. It would be over.
Okay.
Also, you can just do what many premiers do. I'm not enforcing that, notwithstanding laws by.
Yeah.
We actually have technically stronger federalism in Canada than they do in the USA. So there's a lot more there's a lot more room to kind of do what you want. That's why we have crazy tariffs between provinces in Canada and they don't in the US, because it is stupid, but you actually have a lot of room to do what you want between provincial borders. And that was again, you're so right. They actually repealed, the court struck that down. And this lady at Global, I guess the standards really slipped since Anita left, can't even get the basic facts of the current state of the federal laws correctly and goes after John like he did something wrong. And it's like, you know that the federal government controls tax on tips? No,
Both provincial and federal do.
The point is it gets added into your overall income. And if the provincial government says on that section of the income, we're not counting it, that would be them reducing tax on tips or getting rid of it. Yes, you pay to the federal government, but on the provincial side, it's like technically Trump in the US when he says no tax on tips. Technically, states could just keep taxing them. But no, and no one ever, even people in the US are not so partisan that they then go after Trump and say, well, technically the states are still taxing them, because they know what he's talking about.
There's no one there to fact check Sachi, and whoever her producer was wrote that question in for her. So yeah, somebody missed a fact there, but she said it with confidence, so I'll give her that. I guess we got to get back to it, but I don't really care about the plastic or paper straws as much. That doesn't really bug me. I don't like the fact of the grocery store that you pay $2 for a bag, for those fabric bags, which we need to look into how those are ending up in the landfill, or what the energy cost is to create those, the reusable bags. Because
I saw a number where it was like the time that one of those sits in a landfill as opposed to a plastic bag.
I saw one too, and I can't think of it off the top of my head.
It was like 5,000 a one. It was some ridiculous number.
Co-op had that they banned because they technically don't break down as fast as full on reusable bags. Is they got rid of their biodegradable bags at co-op. The government said you can't use those because they don't quite break down as fast as the other biodegradable bags that they tell you, they basically force you to buy. It's so stupid. That was actually cost effective. You can take this, you can take your groceries in it, then you can ball up all your biodegradable waste and throw it in your green bin. That's
great. Exactly what they should be doing. And don't tell me they can't think of something that would do that. That's exactly what they should be doing.
We have bags for the green bins anyway, so why can't that material be used? And
you're not supposed to put those in the green bins. Those bags, they clog up the mulcher apparently, but they could make better bags that are a little bit strong that we could put our food waste in.
And you know why they care? Because the government's trying to sell the mulch to different companies. So it's like the government suddenly starts caring about profit motives once it's trying to sell mulch.
Exactly. And all this gets passed to the consumer.
Yeah.
But can we just pause and appreciate for a moment that David Eby said, like, we can hold up the paper straw as a model for our children of what the future ought to look like? How stupid is this?
Well, and how many lawsuits are going to come in, and it turns out the glue that holds those things together are toxic, and it's
I didn't know that.
Okay. Yeah, there's been reports that the glue is actually leaching out into your drink, and you're ingesting it. It's awful. I get off of those straws right away.
Okay. I didn't
especially
know that.
with your children.
I don't drink pop out of straws, but yeah. I'm not a straw person, so this is not an issue for me as much as the plastic bags. Yeah.
I always hate in restaurants where you get like a drink and they put a straw in it, and then like the fizz basically just causes the straw just to sit at the top of the glass. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, and you've wanted to shoot someone because of how annoying that is.
Well, yeah. Okay.
All right, back to it. There we go.
View has a platform filled with expensive promises, new bridges, SkyTrain expansions, and a lot more. How are you going to pay for it? Mr. Rustad.
Thanks very much. There's no question we need to get our economy going in British Columbia. We have seen the fact that British Columbia is almost cut in half in terms of our economic performance under the NDP over the last 7 years versus what it was prior to that. We have seen almost zero private sector job growth in British Columbia. We're running now, if David Eby gets in, $24 billion worth of deficits over the next 3 years. This is unaffordable in BC. We need to unleash the potential of this province. We have our forest sector that is in shambles. 2/3 of it's been lost. We have to get the feet back under the forest sector. We have 17 mines that need to be opened up. It takes 2 years in Sweden to open a mine. It takes 12 to 15 years in BC. We've got to get this red tape out of the way. We have to make sure that our economy can get humming. We have to make sure we clear out this bureaucracy and red tape as part of it so that we can generate the revenue we need. We're going to make strategic investments. We're going to continue to make those strategic investments, but we have to be able to get that economy going to be able to afford it.
Mr. Eby.
That makes sense.
Well, I mean, there was a lot
He's
there.
tired.
British Columbia is the
my
fastest
goodness.
growing
How do I
province
answer these
economically
questions?
of any of the big provinces since we formed government,
debate.
since the pandemic, and last calendar year. We're growing faster than the other big provinces, but until you feel at home,
Per capita, no.
that reality that we're growing doesn't matter. That's why it's good that we have the fastest growing wages, one of the lowest unemployment rates, and actually, contrary to what John just said,
Oh my God.
we're one of the leaders in
he
Canada in
talking
private
about?
sector job creation. But we got to keep going.
Yeah, raw numbers.
We've got to make sure that people have the chance
If you're from
to
food
get the
jobs,
training
work
to
at
take those
Tim
jobs.
Hortons, maybe.
You know, I
Dude,
met a young man
gain more
who
jobs than
he was
PEI.
moving boxes around
Canadians can't
in a
get a job.
warehouse for $20 an hour. He got a welding course, an apprenticeship. Now his top wage is $62 an hour. That's why we're doubling apprenticeships in the province, to give people the chance to build a good life for
That's
themselves.
why we're going to.
We're
Thank you
doing
for
this.
reading
Well,
this
why haven't you done
He's
it
working
already?
in Alberta.
Conversations during COVID in 2020, where we talked about building back better, where we talked about a more fair economy,
Oh, don't
where we
talk
talked
about
about
building back better.
addressing
Joe
the
Biden does?
growing
She just
inequality,
Bidened
the
us.
growing gap between the rich and
clamoring
the
you.
poor. And yet, in the
Build
4
back
years
better?
since
She
then,
just
we've
pulled out
seen
the
that
Build Back
gap,
Better.
that gap,
Build out
the
the
wide
Build
gap,
Back
we've
Better.
seen
Build Back Better.
inequality
Say that again.
become a bigger problem. We've seen deep poverty become a bigger problem. There was a panel that had Mary Polak, Bowen Ma, and me, all three parties agreeing that we have to find a way to tax
Bowen
wealth.
Ma. I don't
And
like
that's
her.
what we're proposing in our platform. A 18% tax on profits over $1 billion.
And how she handled the
A
shoe shop fires and stuff.
0.2% increase on school tax on properties over $3 million, and a 12.5% marginal tax on incomes over $350,000, and then taxing all assets, all real estate assets, looking at that whole wealth and making sure we're capturing that wealth and taxing it properly.
Thank you, Ms. Firstino. To open
Eby should
debate,
just
you're
turn to her
first,
and say,
Mr.
see,
Eby.
I'm not
Well,
a
I think
communist. She's definitely the communist.
Yeah, we're gonna capture that wealth and tax it accordingly. Holy cow!
Yeah,
She's never
and then
owned a
we'll take
business.
them behind the barn and shoot them in the back of the head.
Or take him behind the school gym and rough him up. Wasn't that Joe Biden also said that?
David Eby,
Build back better. Holy cow, lady.
David Eby might as well say, well, folks, I've got a communist to the left of me and a Nazi to the right.
I think it's a prerequisite. Frankly, I think it should have been a prerequisite to walk into this room. That you have a costed platform. Now, yeah, government budgets are under pressure right now.
I can't stand
Just like
him.
household budgets. We're at the bottom of the
They're
economic
running
cycle.
deficits. What?
You
But
need to
we're not going to
to
make
walk in the
people
room.
pay for that. They need
Oh,
support
what an
now.
arrogant-
That's why we're expanding programs for people. And we're making sure that with our costed platform, you see
We're
declining
expanding.
deficits.
You're
over
always
time.
talking
We're
about what
gonna
you're
return
going
to
to do.
balance.
What have
We're
you
not going
done?
to make you
Return
pay
to
for it.
balance
John,
eventually.
you haven't released a
Billion
costed
deficits.
platform. An economist at UBC says your platform is written in pixie dust. Can you at least be honest with British Columbians? What are you going to cut? How deep are the cuts
He's
going to be in the
nasty.
review that you've proposed? And I know you've started
They
with
always say the
childcare for the
deficit's
middle
gonna go
class,
down over time.
getting rid of
They
support
just
for them.
assume that the spending's
But
gonna
what else
stay
is on
low.
the chopping block in a
You know,
Rustad administration?
Sonny, first of all,
Technically in the long
thanks very
run
much. And
is down.
$24 billion is not responsible. They have no hope at all to
You
get
just
back
made
to
that number
a
up. John,
budget.
Let Mr.
They have no hope
Rustad
whatsoever to get back to a balanced budget. But here's another thing that David Eby and his government has done.
Look at
They
his
have
body
put the cart
language.
before the horse. They're promising
like
to
he's in
do
a
things
freak out
like
trying to
net zero by
strangle God.
2030. They're
Ready to
promising to
pounce.
do heat pumps. They're promising to do electric cars, but we don't have electrical generation.
That's
Last year,
right, John.
Almost
He's
20%
right.
of the electricity we actually needed had to come from outside of borders,
Yeah,
from
we can
things like
solve that
natural
with more
gas
clean
and
energy.
coal-fired. We need to do significant investments in our power generation ability in this province, something that he has ignored as a government, to be able to make sure that we can actually come close to even doing any of these things. But the key piece in my mind is when 1 and 2 youth are thinking about leaving this province, if we do not get our economy going, those people will leave here. That's a brain drain. But most importantly, as parents want their children to stay close to home. They want to see a future for them.
We've had generations of politicians come to the public in election time and say, we're going to give you a tax cut, we're going to give you a rebate. The NDP themselves have given rebates that have amounted to over billions of dollars instead of spending that money on ways to systemically solve problems. You know, it would be really helpful for people if there was transit available. Per capita, people spend $10,000 to own and operate a vehicle. If they had the option of available, frequent, fast, and free transit, that could save people $10,000 a year. People want to know that a healthcare system is there for them. People want to know that their kids are getting an excellent education system. People want mental health care. People want infrastructure. People want affordable housing. Tax cuts and rebates are a way that politicians and political parties try to woo people during elections, and then they turn their back on them for the 4 years after that election and fail to deliver what people need that will actually make their lives more secure and more affordable.
Well, I think, Sonia's clear, and that's the discipline of a costed platform. She's going to increase taxes on certain groups. That's her plan.
For the wealthy.
And
for the
I'm clear.
wealthiest
I
in the
understand,
province.
Sonia. I understand. But for us, we have a costed platform that includes immediate support for you and your family, for the middle class. But John, you said a lot there. But the one thing you studiously avoided saying was where your costed platform. How can we debate you when you won't even say what you're going to cut? Are you cutting healthcare? Cutting childcare? You said you're doing a review. We've seen this movie before when you were in government.
$3.8 billion to healthcare funding over time. David Eby keeps on calling it lie. But here's something David Eby is not telling you he's going to do. He's going to double your carbon tax over the
How about the carbon tax?
He is going to
He's
double
committed to
the
getting rid
carbon
of the
carbon
tax.
tax.
They're both getting rid of the carbon tax.
Thank
That's
you,
just
Sonia.
it.
Half the people in this province are struggling to put food on the table and pay their rent. And his goal is to tax you even further into poverty.
This is the
Taxing
worst
people
kind
in
of
poverty
diversion.
is
John,
not
where
going to
is your
change the
costed
weather,
platform?
Mr. Eby. Taxing people in the
up,
weather is
David.
not going to change the weather. And we will be
This is
releasing.
smiling between his teeth.
Rarely see
But the
those
key
said
things
it.
that
I
we
love
need
it.
to see is the
I'll go
economic
back a bit.
development, make sure we can pay for these things.
This is why we're stuck.
Well, I can't go back, or I might lose it. But
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Nora, can't you hit the left button a bit?
Sometimes you can cack it up, though. I wouldn't. Just we should get to the end.
what are we
now.
trying to get to? What are we trying to get to?
I was whatever you said that he said it. I just didn't hear what he said.
to change the weather. And we will be
cost
releasing.
weather.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're not going to increase
We're
taxes.
not going to change the weather.
It's
That's
not
for all
gonna
of
happen.
us. Yeah.
I love that the NDP and the Green are arguing over who they'd like to steal from.
Anyway,
Guys, like, we're gonna chase out all the wealthiest people. I mean, here's the problem with that left paradigm of like we're gonna raise taxes on the wealthiest people. Who are the wealthiest people? They're the most transient people that could be in your society. If you burden them too much, they'll leave.
they'll leave.
They have the capability of leaving. Why would you want to chase them out?
72,000 people left last year, and like David Eby's response was, well, 150,000 other people entered the province, or however many people entered. It's like, dude, that's not the point. Those
entry-level workers, and they all make us coffee and donuts, and like that's not helpful.
People who were paying those six-figure taxes, and they were just asking, could we pay less than half of our incomes towards taxes? I don't think people realize, especially if you. And the thing is, even people on the right will be like, oh, like, Chip Wilson, he has a lot of money, ergo, like, I'm not going to defend him. He's, maybe he's bad. He's not. He's created more wealth in BC than David Eby ever has, than any of these people. Even he's created more wealth than John Rustad has, because John Rustad really hasn't been in charge yet. But you know what I mean? So people have to stop going out. Like, if Chip Wilson didn't say anything, just like Elon Musk and a lot of other wealthy people didn't advertise that they were conservative, they could be left-wing darling people. Because Lululemon's a very lefty, like left of center coded company in terms of the type of people who buy their products. As soon as he's saying, hey, you know that company that you guys all know and love and you patronize because you like the products, maybe don't tax most of the money from me that I've earned through that company. And, because I got my start when we used to not steal money from people, and they're like, we're going to steal from you even harder. He wants people who are just trying to start up their Lululemons today, their new brand new ideas, to them have the ability. Chip Wilson is himself the bigger populist here. He wants more Chip Wilsons to exist and people all along the spectrum of different levels of success. He wants more success. And then these people are like, oh, screw him. I can't believe he wants to be successful. Send him to the killing fields.
Exactly. Yeah.
Platform and the climate denier. You rarely see those
the key
two things
piece that we need
together.
to see is the economic development to make sure we can pay for these things.
This is why we're stuck in the 20th century.
And this is where we have to wrap
the
this
truncated
section
crap.
of the debate. We have time now for a final round, which will not be a debate. I want each of your answers individually. People who vote for opposing candidates are often friends, colleagues, even spouses in the same household. But at times, each of your campaign's rhetoric has cast the other side as woke, fragile, extreme, or yes, even weird. I would invite you all now.
She looked right at the green lady.
Reflect. Tell us how you yourselves have contributed to an increasingly polarized political climate. And most importantly, help us understand why you're doing that. We will start with Mr. Eby.
Well, I regret that we're having to have a debate about a bunch of very polarizing topics. These are topics that used to be settled for British Columbians for a generation. Climate change is real. Vaccines work. We don't call gay people groomers. We respect people. We respect Indigenous people. We don't promote hate and division.
All the talking, virtue signaling talking points.
That I have to continually talk about these things because John Rustad has fielded candidates that promote these views that he himself also seems to hold some of these views. I would much rather be talking about the fact that he doesn't have a costed platform. The fact that our tax benefit for people is available immediately, that we're building affordable housing. I don't want to be talking about this stuff. I want to talk about what matters to you at home, but it's important that you know
you can talk about anything. It's your
choice. The next health minister could be. Who's making decisions about what your kids learn in school? This is important information.
I can tell you what they learn.
Talk about it.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. We've been actually clear in this campaign that we are talking about the issues. We're talking about the solutions. We're talking about the fact that people are dying on our streets. We're talking about the fact that our healthcare system is collapsing. We're talking about the fact that our economy is in shambles. We're talking about the fact that crime is running rampant. these are the things that the people are concerned about. David Eby wants to talk about conspiracy theories and anything but what's actually going on, because he cannot defend his government's policy. 7 years, can anybody say that anything is better in British Columbia?
That's right.
Is anything better? Certainly, I haven't been able to find anybody to say that there is. As a Conservative government, we're trying to bring common sense change to British Columbia so that we can unleash the potential of our economy, so that we can make sure people can have a good paying job, that people can have a roof over their head, put food on the table, look after their kids, and their kids can look optimistically about being able to have a future in British Columbia, not looking out the window and seeing people lying on a street.
Ms. Furstenau.
Well said.
Really worked hard and been determined in this election to focus on solutions for people, to offer a well-being framework as a way to measure the work of government, to ensure that we're talking about reality and the solutions that we have to some really challenging and complex problems. Polarization is increased in two-party systems. Polarizations happens when parties have to define each other as the opposite of one another. We lose the common ground. The least polarized we were in BC was during the minority government from 2017 to 2020, when we worked together, particularly in response to the global pandemic. It was recognized that we were a province that could work together because we'd been doing that for 3 years. If we want less polarization, if we want more focus on solutions, we have to get away from a winner-takes-all two-party system. We have to elect enough Greens to prevent that from happening.
Leaders, we're running out of time. It is time for closing statements. Each of you will have a minute. There was a draw. According to the draw, Ms. Furstenau, you are up next. Please go ahead.
Oh, good, get her
We
out
have
of the way
so
early.
much incredible potential in this province. We have people who are innovators, who are dreamers, who are entrepreneurs, young people who want to be part of the solutions to the big challenges we face, who want to go to university, become tradespeople, build the BC that is possible, a BC of clean energy, a BC of fairness and more equality, a BC where people aren't left behind, left to sleep on the street. We have so many solutions that we could be implementing, and yet our politics and our governance gets caught up in exactly this, in the polarization, in the pointing fingers, and in not acknowledging the reality of where we're at. In this election, electing more Greens, ensuring we don't give all the power to either of these parties is the way to move us forward as a province in a way that puts you, the people of BC, first.
Mr. Eby.
Thanks. If you're watching at home right now, it's not because there's nothing else on
You did a good
TV.
job of
It's because you
probably
care
away
about this
from the
place.
left NDP
Our amazing home. Sonia's right. The thing that makes British Columbia amazing is the people of British Columbia. And you need support right now. People are hurting. And that's our focus, is to make sure we're supporting British Columbians. The chance to own a home, 300,000 middle-income homes across the province, with the healthcare they deserve, making sure we're getting those doctors and nurses off of the sidelines and into our hospitals, delivering care in our communities, more family doctors for people.
Why are they on the sideline?
Making sure our communities are safe and responsive to the needs of you and your family. The people who are struggling in our streets are cared for in a compassionate way, and they get the care that they need. Now, John Rustad wants to throw that all away. We can't govern through conspiracy theories, cuts, and divisiveness. We only solve this together, and I'm committed to work for you until the job is done.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the listeners, thank the viewers for participating, for seeing this night, for watching, and for caring about British Columbia. I care deeply about this province too. I care about the fact that our youth want to be able to have a future here. I care about the fact that our youth want to be able to have safety here. You know, we have a government that kicks out a Jewish cabinet minister, Selena Robinson, to appease a mob who last night was burning flags in front of the art gallery. I find that incredibly offensive.
Oh.
In British Columbia, we want to
really
make sure
like
we build
Selena
that
Robinson
positive
either.
opportunity for people to
She
have that
wasn't
future.
good. I don't like
That's why our entire
Rachel
plan
Grable
is
either,
about
but
putting you first, whether it's
I need
healthcare
to
and
wait
patients
to figure
first,
out.
whether it's our economy and making sure you can build a job, whether it is the investments that are needed for infrastructure. I'm a proud Canadian, and I can tell you the Conservative Party of British Columbia will bring forward a common sense plan that will deliver real prosperity for everyone here in British Columbia. Thank you for watching this evening.
Okay, leaders, thank you. Thank you for
like
a
him.
respectful debate this evening on behalf of the Broadcast Consortium. We hope you at home have been helped and aided as you get to know the leaders, the parties, and their platforms. Election Day is October 19th. You can vote in advance starting this Thursday, October 10th, and you can request a mail-in ballot right now. Go to elections.bc.ca for all the information you need. On behalf of everyone, good night. Thanks for watching. I'm Shachi Curl.
Now they're going to do
All
their
right,
panel.
that's yeah,
But-
they're going to do their panel. I don't really.
Yeah.
We've got our own panel to
We've got
discuss
our
what
own.
just happened.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to.
I was happy that Rustad slammed Eby at the very end there. That he basically Eby kicked out Selena Robinson to please Samadou, because that's the radical, like, flat out pro-terrorist organization that was the muscle behind all the protests against Selena. That Eby he kicked her out in response to Samadou's protests. This is an organization whose international organizer, who's the Vancouver organizer as well. She was in a conference, the Samadou conference in Madrid, and started yelling that, like, the fascist newspapers say that we are here to celebrate October 7th. Hell yes, we're here to celebrate October 7th. She's absolutely out of her mind. That was the lady Eby kicked out Selena Robinson to please. That's how
bizarre.
People don't realize this.
Yeah.
This is what's going to play really well in Vancouver, because Vancouver has a sizable Jewish population. So few people know, in the midst of Eby pretending that he takes anti-Semitism seriously, that he kicked her out in favor of people who actively celebrated killing civilians.
Yeah. Oh, so that's what I'm not up on that story, but thank you for explaining it there.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. Clyde, what did you think of the whole shebang?
I thought, well, for one, I think when it comes to people who are, have paid only attention to the media, perhaps live in Vancouver, places like that, and come from a left perspective, but just don't like where British Columbia is going, I'm afraid that a lot of them might get wrapped up in what Eby's saying. I mean, that's my fear. And it looks like since the last debate, people have shifted towards the NDP and away from the Conservatives. Unfortunately, I think the Conservatives, a lot of their steam is just because they hate what's happening in British Columbia. John Rustad isn't particularly like the most polished, TV evangelistic kind of politician, right? He is speaking the truth. He is talking about good talking points. But you have this guy who's playing the game, and I don't know how people are going to buy into that. We're watching this and we're going, this guy's full of crap. But do voters see that crap that he's putting out there, or are they buying it? That's my big question coming out of this.
Yeah, a lot of normal people still watch TV, like my aunts, my mom, her friends, my girlfriends, like their families, the people that don't know what I'm talking about and don't look into anything else, but they just go home after work and watch Netflix or a little bit of the news. And you're right to bring up that fear. It's like, it's the way the media portrays everything. It's going to shape your mind. You really are going to be like, I guess Eby's not so bad. I don't really know about this other guy. Oh, they say he's a radical. They say he's a conspiracy theorist. They say he's this, that, and the other. And then at the beginning of the news hour, they play an ad from the NDP, an attack ad against Rustad, right? So if you're watching the news hour, you're going to be like, oh, this guy, he's risky Rustad. So they might do a very good job, the mainstream, of convincing people that you better stick with the devil you know. And the devil you know is Eby. And so that's my fear too, because I have relatives in the States. They're lifelong Democrats. They know things are bad, but they don't know what else to do. They've always been a Democrat. They're not going to change. So I think that's a good point you bring up.
I think there's a lot more change happening in the United States right now. I think a lot has happened, especially with what's going on with Kamala Harris and the fact that she wasn't even elected to be running.
Same with Eby, but people don't see that because, like, one of my aunts in the States is like, I've always voted Democrat. I'm a Democrat, like, so she's gonna vote Democrat. She just can't see any other way.
There,
Yeah.
I think this debate, a lot of people like think, well, this debate doesn't change anything. Eby said his thing, Rusted said his thing. Why would it matter to people now? The difference is all the viewers who have been hearing Rusted's radical, Rusted's extreme, are now just seeing, they've just seen him be the most normal person on that stage that entire time. He was actually like the adult in the room.
Yes.
He was professional. This is a replay of what happened in 2023 between the Alberta NDP and the UCP. I'm not the world's biggest fan of Danielle Smith for, reasons that I want her to actually cut taxes and stop talking about it. But like in that debate that occurred in Alberta in the provincial election, leading up to it, the Alberta NDP was like, Danielle Smith's crazy. She's a conspiracy theorist. All the same talking points. And then she shows up and just was very neutral, professional. And Rachel Notley didn't do a bad job. Eby did a bad job in this debate because Eby just came off like a jerk the entire time. And he especially, and I've said this for a while, middle-class women who are moderates, who could go either way, they will watch this debate and hate Eby. He's just this uppity adolescent jerk who thinks that he's right, you're wrong, and I'm going to talk over you to tell you why I'm actually, I know what I'm talking about, and you're just using talking points. I don't use talking points. He was bad. And John comes off professional, and when you know all the things people have been saying about him, you're like, really, this is the radical guy? Because he isn't radical. John is like the most neutrally toned person you could pick as the leader, and I think that this is actually the perfect election for somebody like him. You have somebody who is resistant of any criticism or correction in David Eby. You have the most sanctimonious person to his left in Sonia Furstenau, who's probably siphoning off some of the lefty voters who don't like that the NDP is fully anti-capitalist. And then you have Rusted, it's taking voters from the moderate Horgan right of the NDP and then maintaining his own voters. And I think a lot of people looking at Eby are like, is this the guy I'm actually showing up and voting for? He's just painfully full of himself. He is professionally impressed with himself at all times.
Can I be the Chantal Hubert of the panel and tell you what I didn't like about Rustad?
Good, you go.
Is what I'm even as a finance...
if you do it in a French accent.
Yeah. No, but I'm not very good at that. But what I can tell you is, even as a finance person, I don't fully understand the Rustad rebate. I don't know if that $1,500 monthly credit is inclusive of your $15,000 and change tax exemption already in BC. There is no John Rustad tax calculator or John Rustad rebate calculator. I looked it up. So I'm not really sure how they expect people to vote for them if this is their main plank issue. It's a tax rebate that they admit does not come into play until 2026, and it's not really well explained or very easy to understand. So I think for the low information voter, which is most of us, that's not going to appeal to many people.
Well, they're also getting rid of the provincial carbon tax, which I think that's immediate, and then the other one then later. At the end of the day, it's really just what are the vibes of the different leaders, and this is just truly how politics works. Is that Rustad's vibes, and obviously it's very difficult to go over all the things you want to do in a debate. That the vibes of Rustad is professional, going to
I agree there.
Out of my way, going to get the mines online, stuff like this. That if I want economic action, I want just the feeling of more freedom to do what I want, it's Rustad. If I am somebody who is a progressive, and I think that the government hasn't gone far enough, you're voting for Sonia Furstenau, which is actually dangerous for Eby, because there is a big portion of his audience who, seeing all how bad things are, they don't want to admit it's because NDP policy is bad. They want to say, well, it wasn't implemented right. It is kind of like if you've ever read the book from Thomas Sowell, Visions of the Anointed. No, it's not that the plans failed. It's just that the plan didn't go far enough. And so I think that you're going to have some people siphoning off towards the Greens. I've talked to tons of doors, lots of NDP voters in denial voting Green because the NDP wasn't NDP enough, even though Eby's NDP was far more to the left than Horgan's. And then I think Eby is, he's the type of voter who's coming out and still voting NDP is more of just the anti-conservative voter. I don't see much excitement to keep them in government for another 4 years. Like, it's very there's no, and I tell people this all over the place, and because there's multiple conservative governments running for re-election right now in other parts of Canada, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick. Higgs and New Brunswick needs a big audacious thing to run on, and they have been doing things with like HST cuts and whatnot. Eby doesn't have like a big audacious thing that we're going to do this if you give us another 4 years. Right. He's running like Harper was in 2015, but at least Harper had decent performance as the prime minister. Eby has no good performance, and he's just saying, well, the other guys could be worse.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes people just vote for the devil they know. You know,
an interesting sidewinder in all of this as well. Speaking of the devil, 6 members who are incumbents are going to be running as independents because of the fallout between the Conservatives and the United whatever party.
Right.
Do you know why they're actually doing that?
Why?
I don't. I thought you'd be the person to ask. You
get 18 months of transitional allowance if you lose in an election rather than just step down and not run again. None of these people are actually spending any money actually running. Like, some of them are like taking photos with some volunteers and doing some door knocking on camera and then showing up to like the debate. None of them are actually running seriously, other than maybe a couple of them are trying to be jerky enough to try and trip up their conservative opponent.
So you don't think any of those independent incumbents will get reelected?
Zero. I don't think any of them will get more than 5% of the vote. No, maybe Bernier.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Maybe Bernier does, because he's in a rural riding where people are more free to vote how they want, in the sense it's either the Conservative or an independent. NDP doesn't have a chance over there. But all of them get about $3,000 a month if they lose, rather than just leave.
Okay, so I have a bit more information on the rebates here. So BC, this is from True North News. BC Conservatives announce up to $3,000 in monthly rent and mortgage tax rebates. Now, it says that the program is designed to offer financial relief when the cost of living continues to surge. The measure, dubbed the Rustad rebate, would start by exempting $1,500 per month in budget 2026, increasing $500 per year until it reaches $3,000 per month. Now, it also does say that in 2017, Eby and the NDP promised a $400 rent rebate for our renters, regardless of income. As usual, they broke that promise not once, but twice, said Rustad. Not only did they fail to deliver for 5 consecutive budgets, but when they finally introduced it in 2023, it was so severely income tested that the average family in Vancouver can't qualify. So this is the different things. So I'm not sure how this is going to roll out, because it does say not until 2026.
Increasing per year to $3,000 a month.
Yeah, and I think like what is not well understood about this is your first $15,000 and change is already tax exempt. So yeah, I don't really know how that's supposed to work, practically speaking, because if making more than $15,000, the very poorest people would get nothing, because you're already tax exempt on that first $15,000.
And so, I think the intention of it is because people who are making less than $50,000 a year are only paying like 5% income tax. Income taxes are actually are not gradual at all in BC. You're making 5%, you're paying 5%, 7%, then it's like 13, 15, 8. But
you're only paying it on the next incremental ladder, right?
Yeah, of course you are. But I think the whole point is this is basically a way to, without having to do an income tax cut, you just put people into lower brackets artificially through allowing them to write off rent.
Yeah, I don't find this to be a very good policy. Like, why not just cut everybody's taxes? Everybody pays for.
That's what I would always say. I would always just say 10% flat tax. Just implement that. You'll literally bring in more revenues next year. Trump's tax cuts brought in more revenue in the next couple of years after they were implemented, because more people were bringing money back into the American economy. That's actually the funny thing with Trump in the U.S. He keeps talking about putting tariffs on companies that don't manufacture in the U.S. That's entirely unnecessary, because his tax cuts are so big that every company is running back to do it. They don't even need to be told that if you don't, you'll get taxed if you try and sell here. He's actually not much of a protectionist, or he's a failed protectionist, because he's so pro-free market that the protectionism threat doesn't even mean anything to people. They just come back as taxes are only 15% if you manufacture here.
Yeah, but
Oh,
you can look like a strong man while they're just doing it anyway because of the tax cuts.
It's the same thing on foreign policy. Trump seems like very, anti-interventionist, but it's because he's so willing to smash an enemy that the enemy never wants to fight, so it never happens.
Well, that's a good way to be.
That's smart. Yeah, that is smart.
Well, it's peace through strength type
The
stuff.
other issue too with the Rustad rebate, I'm sorry, I know I'm hung up on this, is that it's going to be demand stimulative, right? Because if it's cheaper to buy a house or have a mortgage in BC based off of this rebate, then you're going to have more buyers. People make decisions on the margin, and that's going to rise. Home prices are just going to go up.
It's going to be rent and mortgages though.
Right. So same thing for rent. If I get a $500 or $1,500 rebate for renting in BC versus no rebate in Alberta, then it attracts me to BC. Well, that's going to increase the demand on rent, which is going to increase rent costs.
If you're doing it
it's demand stimulative. Unless you're going to build a whole bunch of more houses, the rent is just going to go up, pretty much equal to whatever the presumed rebate is.
It would be demand stimulative. It'd be demand stimulative if you lower taxes in general. But I think the real thing is that all of these plans have to come in conjunction with making it far easier to get new housing build permits approved. That's the thing that has to happen. Like, I think with all of this stuff, just like, I don't think you'd get into office and immediately remove the rent cap. It's just politically not smart to do that. You'd have to wait a while because a couple things have to happen at the same time. More houses have to go up and taxes go down. And I think that in politics, it's good to not focus on the details. And this sounds like I'm like being anti-intellectual. Don't worry about the details. I'm more so, what I mean is that you have to focus on the macro goal, that the amount of tax burden in BC should go down by like 25% in the next few years. That's what you need to focus on. Regulations, and this is my idea, that in specific industries, I'd like to take a team of people with highlighters and just highlight through regulatory books of everything that can go away. Half the size of regulations, half the size of or like reduce the tax burden, not half the tax burden, but significantly reduce the tax burden. And a lot of things actually start to solve themselves. It's like people say Javier Milei is cutting things too fast, and the poverty has gone up. Like, actually, it hasn't. People are off of government subsidies and they're getting jobs. So temporarily, for like a minute moment, they technically fall into poverty. They get a job and then they immediately rise out of poverty. So a lot of sometimes pain even has to happen before you can get to the point where you're actually back on your feet, making money and growing wealth. So I think it's just the macro movement of the province has to be towards less taxes, less regulations, less government.
They should just cut income taxes then. This Rustad rebate is because you said like, oh, you don't have to monitor it, but of course you do. Like there's going to be so many complexities associated with this as well. What happens if I'm married, I'm the owner of the home, but my wife pays half of the mortgage? Am I entitled to the entire rebate? And then, how do you determine how that works when we separate? Am I to owe her, or she owe me? I mean, it's just so
That'd
much.
probably be pretty easy. Like, and I agree with you. I'd rather just have a flat out tax.
It's reinventing the wheel where it isn't necessary.
Yeah,
that's the worst thing about that's the worst thing about the carbon tax. The carbon tax creates all of these monitors and all these extra jobs just to implement it. That's why getting rid of the carbon tax and that infrastructure
just increase income tax. Yeah,
it multiplies the deflationary effect, not just by getting rid of the tax, but also getting rid of all of the useless spending that goes into implementing the tax. So I agree with you. That's the thing I've been mad at Danielle Smith over in Alberta. She wanted to lower income taxes. Frankly, we should be getting back to the flat 10% tax that we used to have. I'd lower it to 9% just for the effect. And you could easily do that. Like, I think that the province should lower the local provincial sales tax. It should just reduce it by 2%.
Yes, that's a great idea. Fantastic idea. I've never heard any politician say that.
And I understand all this stuff can't be advertised in an election because voters get very scared of change. So I understand this. I'm not part of like the Conservative Party policy team or at all like anything like that. These are just like, I think the instinct should always be, if you're going to reduce taxes, it should, and I agree with you, it should just be as simplistic as possible. Although I would say the Rustad rebate policy to most people who their rent costs are like front of mind when it comes to a cost, it's trying to target the savings in their mind to the rent you're paying.
Well, that's why they need like a Rustad rebate calculator. right? So that people can.
I guess so, but it's also a catchy thing to say. It's the Rustad rebate and rent, and that's what was on people's minds. And people know that they don't get a rebate for the carbon tax here in this province. So people are just, it's maybe a smart political tactic.
There is a certain demographic of voters who, if you just lower taxes, they'd be like, well, why is Chip Wilson getting such a big tax cut? It's like, you're getting a tax cut too. What are you talking about? I was thinking that we're like, oh, the tax cut only mostly benefited millionaires and billionaires. I'm like, yeah, they're paying all the taxes. What do you want to? What do you want?
A good point was brought up earlier about this. So we're going to tax the rich. We're going to tax the rich. But like it's funny, right? If I was rich and I had a big business and I employed a lot of people and I generated a lot of jobs, I'm doing a good thing for the province, right? Like as Lululemon is, right? And you have to start somewhere. I work for a medical clinic right now, and it's a growing company or whatever. And they employ me, they employ the massage therapist, the physiotherapist. It's a business. It's good for the economy. It's good for British Columbia, right? And to heavily tax somebody that has a big business that's providing jobs, it's like, I'm not sure how I feel about that either. Is that fair? I don't know. So I think a general tax cut all across the board is what people need. And also, on another note, people are sick of all this woke stuff too, which I think that John speaks to, right? We don't all the craziness that they teach you in schools and all this sort of climate change and all this kind of, and the jab stuff. At least he's speaking to that, and that's speaking to a lot of people.
I think a good idea during the debate is if he hammered Eby on letting men compete in women's sports. That would have been a really good one, because he wanted to make sure that girls' sports in schools and like colleges and whatnot are for women. That would have been a good thing to hit Eby on, because I think a lot of, especially, and I keep bringing up middle class women, because the Conservatives already do really well with men. And I think that what you have to do if you want to eat into the demographics that the NDP are doing well with, that's a jarring fact that the NDP is totally okay with, that biological men are competing in women's sports. That would make a lot of those people be like, wait, what? And then if Eby then tries to shoot back at it, like John says, you're transphobic, I think a lot of those people would be like, wait, what? Like, they would just start getting like really upset that like actually that's your feeling towards women not being able to have
people's memories are so short though, because there was a time when that was like more of a hot topic with the boxing and the Olympics and the swimmer, the Leah Thomas or whatever, and now it's gone a little bit quiet, hasn't it, on the radar? But also John Rustad isn't the type to go for the jugular. Like, he could really do that, but he's I don't think that's his personality or his makeup.
And maybe that's probably the right thing to do, in the sense that he's just there to look like the nice guy. He looks like your neighbor. He looks he looks like your neighbor who's gotten up there, like, a neighbor that you could actually imagine being your like premier. He looks like an adult. And I keep going back to, also, again, can we just mention the fact that Eby's podium was like rigged against him? If I felt bad for Eby in any way, it's the fact that
podium bugged you.
Yeah, whoever gave him that podium from Global News hated him, because the podium only came up to like his waist right here. It was so weird.
Podiums, like, they don't go up and down, it's just a chunk, right? So they're going to make it a standard size, and we can't help it that guy's a giraffe size. What is he, 6'6", 6'7"?
Well, in American politics, they do make custom podiums for each person. Maybe
they do.
He doesn't deserve it, and we don't have the budget. Global doesn't have the budget.
Well, even in Alberta, when there was the debate with Danielle Smith and Rachel Notley, they had like a special stool for Rachel Notley to stand up, so she didn't look like a midget.
Petite, right? Yeah, she's like
David Eby, his posture was terrible the entire debate. He was like this.
He was side profile the whole debate, just ready to go. Like, you talking about me? You talking about me? He was the whole time. He was like this. Like, you want a piece of me? You want a piece of me?
Yeah, the cameraman had to keep panning around to his movements.
It's a locked off shot, and David Eby is just turned to the side. He's just turned to the side. He
turned his back to John Rustad like a jilted ex-lover.
Yeah.
But do you think that if regular people watch the debate, like people like my mom or whatever, do you think she'll be like, oh, that Rustad isn't so bad after all? Or, I just don't know what the normies
he seemed
think.
sweet.
I don't know.
He seemed really nice. I thought so. I mean, I don't know. I'm being the black sheep of the panel and trying to be the most critical.
He's
And
This is David Eby's posture. I'm trying to demonstrate.
That's the posture.
It kind of has this like
oh,
bow.
that's funny.
Like,
How did
yeah, I
you
keep-
draw that so fast?
That's,
That's so
this is
funny.
the David Eby like spine right there.
It's
I
the
think
EB scoliosis. That's
Yeah.
what the healthcare system gets you under that guy.
Like, but
Oh,
I
you
will
guys
say
are
that
being
Russia was
mean.
just a nice guy in the debate, which was good.
I feel kind of bad for him now.
I have bad posture.
These are
and he
human
makes me look
beings.
like I could
Quiet.
walk around with a book on top of my head all day.
He totally is like a cartoon character like this. Yeah, he totally was. Yeah. And it's just like insecure too. A little bit insecure, punchy. It's really
Well, it
funny
was
how
all the
you
faces.
like
It was
a
the faces he
he
was
looked
making.
like-
He rolling his eyes and
Yeah.
posturing and all this other stuff. It just didn't seem professional at all.
He looks like if Shaggy from Scooby-Doo became a politician in terms of like the way he carries himself. And Sonia looks like what's her name? Velma.
Velma. Yeah, Sonia's so Velma. She morphed into Velma a little bit,
She also
right?
looks like Shelley Duvall a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I was getting tired of the this is old way of thinking trope from the Green Party. Like
yeah.
as if an old way of thinking is a bad way of thinking. Like, I don't.
Sonia.
Sometimes an old way is a good way, right?
Sonia First to Know will bring us back to the future because the film apparently is the Stone Age.
She'll take you back to 1957 or whatever.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, she was like,
Another-
we need to go into the 21st century. We need to get out of the pocket dimension that we are somehow in. I will build a portal that runs off of farmers market jams.
Like if she was someone in the farmers market, she's just the person who makes beads with like hemp, like very useless part of the farmers market. Like I went there for food, and I'm like, you're peddling patchouli? Get out of here! I don't want to.
Can I ask you guys your opinion on just something quickly? Because 2 independents reached out to me to be like, "How come you did a story on the main guys, but you don't talk to the independents?" So I said, "Okay, well tomorrow I'll talk to a couple of independents." What do you think of people like? I don't know much. What do you think of the independents? Anybody? What's your opinion?
It's great that they exist. It's just a shame now that they don't get more coverage. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
certainly
my
fighting for
problem
mine.
with independence sometimes is that if you're an independent who's going to win as an independent, you got to be like Bobby Ann Brady in Ontario, who won as an independent after she was disallowed from the PC nomination in her area. Halderman, it's basically the provincial version of Lewis's riding, Leslyn Lewis's riding. Or you got to be like, again, somebody like Tim Hoven in Alberta who didn't win but came second, put up a good fight. Or you got to be Jody Wilson-Raybould. You have to have been running for an entire year as an independent to hit every door. My problem with independents oftentimes is that they're contacting media people saying, "Why aren't you talking to me?" And it's like, because you didn't put the effort into the point where I noticed you. You have to, it's like every single, like, it's like,
Oh my God, that's a good point. Yeah.
we're not interviewing the Christian Heritage Party because they didn't even get enough candidates in every riding. They have like 5 candidates. It's kind of a problem. You gotta, independents can win, but you gotta be the person who's a business owner in the area. People know who you are. You've hit every door. You've had conversations. It's like a federal nomination. I had to talk to people not as the conservative candidate, but as someone who wants to run for that party. The party is going to exist whether I run for them or not. So I have to convince you that you should become a member so I can become that person. That's the type of like stuff you got to do as an independent. Go to people's doors, say, "Hey, this is my name. This is what I'm about. Do you want to, like, can we talk about policy?" You got to make people trust you. So often I get annoyed with people who are like, "I put my name on the ballot and people should look at me because I have great ideas." Well, you didn't work hard enough to tell people about them. Like, I'm not trying to be rude to people. I think there's great independents out there, and some people just don't know how the process works. But like, you can't just stick a website online and think, "Well, it's like the PPC, frankly. So many PPC guys are like, my platform's better than the federal conservatives on all these different things. Like, did you door knock anyone? Well, no. It's like, well, what? They work harder than you. I'm sorry.
Right. Like, make your name known if you're going to put your hat in the ring, like, make your name known a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
The Conservative Party of Canada.
Some have. Corinne Morey has. The nurse has, and I'm gonna.
I've had Corinne on.
Yeah.
And she mentioned her candidacy, as an independent, and a few others. I've had PPC candidates. I've had anybody who wants to come and talk to me. I'll have the NDP on. I'll have the Greens on.
I'll talk to anyone too.
The Communist Party.
Yeah, the Communist Party. I'll have
That'd
someone.
be fun. I'd like that.
That would be fun. Yeah.
A good journalist interviews anybody, right?
I'll have them for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, got a couple of super chats here I want to get to. Angelina Cordoso with a $5 super chat says, I have no words to describe what I think of Eby. I only have not nice ones that are. We
read that one already, but it made me laugh twice.
There you go. Also, Pit Sky P with a $5 super chat. Removing people from the 10 cities will push more people to be homeless. Critical thinking alert. Moving on with Richard Evans for $5 says, in conclusion, the government is the problem. I tend to agree with that one. Chan for $2.79 says, hit that like button. It helps out a ton. It gets these into the algorithm. It gets more people watching them. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Trish Prue, the $2 super chat says, all of you are doing a great job. You guys are all doing a great job. Thank you, Trish. Appreciate that. But yeah, that was tonight's live coverage of that. Anyone in British Columbia needs to now make sure you're registered, get out and vote according to your beliefs, what you think, who you think should be running this province moving forward. So get out, find out who your candidates are in your specific riding, vote accordingly. And do so. If you're voting NDP, make sure you're out there by October 20th. I'm joking. It's everybody vote by the 19th. That's the final day for voting. There'll be some early voting. People can get out there, do that. But make sure you get in there before the deadline's over.
Yeah.
Any last words, guys, before we end the stream?
Well, you got another super chat from Angela there.
That was a very civilized debate, I thought. It was civilized. It was clean. It wasn't that exciting. It was maybe a little, I don't know. I was very neutral about it. I thought it'd be more punchy, but they were very well behaved.
I disagree with the well-behaved thing. I think Rusted and Sonia were well-behaved.
But Eby was the brat.
Was bad. Like, again, I think that it's one of those. It wasn't like there wasn't a moment where John punched Eby metaphorically and like ended him or anything like that. But I don't think that was John's goal going in. I think it was honestly, and I think you guys even noticed it too. He almost seemed tired by the end, Eby, because he was so snipey the entire time. It's almost like he kind of ran out of steam.
He's like a kid with a tantrum. Yeah.
And anyone who was on the fence wouldn't look at that and say, well, I have to vote for Eby. He called John a conspiracy theorist because Eby was so jumpy the entire time. You're like, you'll say anything about this guy. He seemed like he was willing to say any little jab to get under John. And the fact that John just kind of let that pass by him, I think helped out a lot.
I hope so.
Yeah, my highlight was when Rustad said we want to get rid of everything that sucks.
Yeah.
That's a sort of routine, everyman language I can get behind.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Angela Cordoso with a final super chat saying, thanks for the awesome panel, everyone. Enjoyed it. I've enjoyed this as well. I want to thank you guys for coming on. Alex, amazing Zoltan. We got Wyatt Claypool, Anita K. Any last requests? Tell people where to find you online. Alex, start with you.
Oh yeah, I'm on X, and I got a little YouTube channel. I got all kinds of stuff, so check me out.
I have a YouTube channel also that is growing. It's Anita K and 808. If you put Anita K 808, you can find me there. So I hope you join me over there, and I'll just search my name on Rumble also.
Yeah, don't search my name on YouTube because you'll end up just finding Indian news channel clips. So you'll have to look up the National Telegraph on YouTube, and then you'll find my videos. But yeah, I endorse all these people's YouTube channels.
I stumbled across those Indian news videos. That was so random.
Yeah,
you have to explain that to me later.
Yeah, well, it was during all the Khalistani stuff going on.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in some of those conversations, found myself in some of that. Anyway, I'm going to end the stream. Everybody watching at home, thanks for joining on. Stick around, guys. We'll share a little information here before we go. But everyone in the stream, everyone keep on trucking. Sorry about the hoarse voice, but it is what it is. I got sick. Cheers.
Thank you.